At Christmas dinner, my sister-in-law and I started arguing. My mother-in-law slapped me 3 times across the face and spat that I was trash and her son deserved better. Then she pointed her manicured finger at my 3-year-old daughter. "Take that trash and get out." My husband did not hesitate. He took my hand and said we were leaving. Exactly 1 hour later, his father called in a total panic. "Your mother just found out. I am Tasha, 32 years old, and my entire life I was told I was not good enough because I grew up in the foster care system." What my wealthy Atlanta in-laws did not know was that the orphan they despised held the keys to their entire financial existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who thought they could walk all over you. The crystal chandeliers above Vivian's mahogany dining table cast a warm glow, but the atmosphere in the room was absolute ice. We were supposed to be celebrating the holidays, but as usual, my mother-in-law Vivian had turned the evening into a showcase of her own elite Atlanta lineage. I sat quietly next to my husband Marcus, cutting a piece of roast turkey for our 3-year-old daughter Aaliyah. Across from me sat Vanessa, Marcus's younger sister, and the undisputed golden child of the family. Next to her was Bradley, her husband. Bradley sat there with his slicked-back blonde hair and Wall Street entitlement chuckling as he swirled an expensive glass of scotch. Vivian worshipped Bradley. She treated her white son-in-law like a prince who had graciously descended from high society to elevate our African-American family to new levels of prestige. Vanessa picked up the custom hand-poured candle set I had brought as a hostess gift, turning it over with a look of pure disgust. "It is very crafty," Vanessa sneered, dropping it back onto the table. "I suppose when you grow up bouncing between group homes, you learn how to make do with cheap materials. But honestly, you do not have to try so hard to cover up your background. Marcus has enough money to buy real gifts." She then dramatically hoisted a pristine leather handbag onto her lap. "Bradley just bought me this $10,000 Cartier bag for Christmas. Some men actually know how to provide real luxury." Bradley offered a smug, self-satisfied grin, while Vivian beamed with pride from the head of the table. I placed my fork down slowly. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every word landed with absolute precision. "That Cartier bag is stunning, Vanessa," I said evenly. "It is definitely a lot nicer than the 3 declined transactions you had at Neiman Marcus yesterday afternoon. The cashier looked pretty embarrassed for you when you had to put those shoes back." The dining room went dead silent. Vanessa's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a pale, panicked expression. Bradley stopped swirling his scotch. Vivian slammed her hands down on the table, making the fine china rattle. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Vivian erupted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "How dare you disrespect her and her prestigious husband in my house? You have always been jealous of Vanessa. You resent the fact that she comes from a distinguished family while you come from absolutely nothing." I stood up, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "I am not jealous of a woman who uses her husband's money to hide her own insecurities," I replied calmly. Vivian marched around the table so fast her chair tipped over backward. Before Marcus could intervene, she stepped right up to me and slapped me across the face. The sharp crack echoed in the silent room. I barely had time to register the sting before she struck me a second time and then a third. My cheek burned and I tasted copper where my teeth caught my inner lip. "You are trash!" Vivian spat, her face contorted with rage. "You are nothing but uneducated, low-class trash. My son is a brilliant trauma surgeon. He deserves a woman with pedigree, not a charity case." Then she turned her furious gaze toward high chair, where my 3-year-old daughter sat, wide-eyed and frightened. Vivian pointed a trembling finger right at Aaliyah. "Take that trash and get out of my house." I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream. I just stared into the eyes of a woman who had finally shown her true ugly soul. But I did not need to fight back because Marcus was already moving. My husband stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He did not yell or lose control. He walked calmly over to Bradley, picked up the full glass of red wine and dumped it directly over Bradley's immaculate suit. Bradley jumped up shouting, but Marcus ignored him completely. He turned to his mother with a look of absolute disgust. You just assaulted my wife and called my daughter trash. Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. From this second forward, you do not have a son. Marcus picked up Aaliyah, grabbed my hand, and guided us out of the dining room without looking back. My father-in-law, Jerome, sat frozen in his seat the entire time, too cowardly to say a single word, as we walked out the front door and into the cold night air. The drive back to our house was shrouded in a heavy, tense silence. Aaliyah fell asleep in her car seat, blissfully unaware of the permanent fracture that had just split our family. Marcus kept one hand tightly wrapped around mine on the center console. He kept apologizing, his voice thick with regret, for forcing me to attend the dinner, acknowledging how his family had always looked down on my foster care background. I simply squeezed his hand, using my other hand to wipe a small drop of blood from the corner of my mouth. As we navigated the dark Atlanta streets, I pulled my encrypted laptop from my bag and rested it on my knees. I had been holding on to a secret for months, waiting for the right time to address it, trying to be graceful. Vivian's slaps had just burned that grace to the ground. Exactly 1 hour after we left the mansion, Marcus's phone lit up in the cup holder. It was Jerome. Marcus answered it on speakerphone, expecting another barrage of insults from his mother. Instead, we heard his father's voice trembling with raw, undisguised terror. Marcus hit the speakerphone button on the dashboard console. The Bluetooth connected, filling the quiet interior of our car with absolute chaos. In the background, Vivian was screaming at a pitch I had never heard before. Glass shattered against a wall. Jerome was breathing heavily into the receiver. Marcus Jerome said, his voice shaking so badly he could barely form the words. Your mother went into your old study to calm down after you left. She was looking for your old high school photos to show Bradley. She opened the locked bottom drawer of your desk. Marcus, she found the papers. She found the foreclosure notice. I reached over and pressed the microphone button on the screen. Mr. Jerome, I said, keeping my voice completely steady. Tell your wife that if she rips that piece of paper, the Fulton County Sheriff will padlock your front doors at 8 in the morning. The screaming in the background stopped for a fraction of a second, only to be replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps charging toward the phone. I knew exactly what piece of paper Vivian was holding. 3 months ago, my secure financial monitoring software flagged a massive default on the family estate. The bank had quietly foreclosed on their multi-million-dollar mansion. Vivian and Jerome were broke. They had been keeping up appearances, attending country club galas and buying extravagant gifts, all while drowning in millions of dollars of unpayable debt. I did not tell Marcus right away. Instead, I used my anonymous limited liability company to buy their foreclosed debt directly from the bank at a premium. I paid for it using the wealth I had built from my forensic auditing firm. I became their landlord in secret. I allowed them to stay in that house, preserving their precious Atlanta high society reputation purely out of respect for my husband. I wanted to give them time to figure out a graceful exit. But Vivian slapping me and calling my daughter trash had just voided their lease. Grace was no longer on the table. Give me that phone, Vivian shrieked, snatching the receiver from Jerome. I heard a scuffle before her shrill voice blasted through our car speakers. You lying, scheming foster system rat. You forged this. You hacked into our bank accounts and printed a fake document to scare us. We are the most respected family in Fulton County. I kept my eyes on the dark road ahead. You are a tenant in default, Vivian, I replied smoothly. My company owns the deed to that property. You have exactly 30 days to pack your fake pearls and vacate before I have you physically removed from the premises. You listen to me, you ungrateful ghetto trash! Vivian spat, her voice cracking with desperation. You think your little community college accounting degree scares me. I have Bradley. My son-in-law is an investment banker. He handles portfolios you cannot even pronounce. I am going to have Bradley call his elite legal team tomorrow morning. They will crush your little fake company. They will tie you up in litigation until you are begging on the streets where you belong. We will take full custody of Aaliyah just to save her from your poverty mentality. Marcus slammed his hand against the steering wheel. Do not ever speak about my daughter again, he roared. I placed a calming hand on his arm and leaned closer to the microphone. Have Bradley call his elite lawyers, Vivian. I look forward to meeting them. Just make sure you start packing tonight. I tapped the screen and disconnected the call, plunging the car back into silence. Marcus exhaled a shaky breath. He glanced at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and admiration. "You bought the house?" he asked quietly. "I bought the debt," I corrected. "I wanted to protect your family name. I thought if I held the deed I could quietly transfer it to you later, so your parents would not end up homeless. But after tonight they can find their own way." Marcus nodded, his jaw set in firm resolve. "Good. They deserve whatever is coming to them." We pulled into our driveway. The house was quiet and safe. We carried a sleeping Aaliyah upstairs and tucked her into her bed. Marcus kissed her forehead, lingering there for a long moment, fiercely protective. I walked straight into my home office and locked the door behind me. I needed to understand something that had been bothering me since the moment I bought their debt. Jerome ran a successful import company. Vivian had a massive retirement fund inherited from her grandparents. They should not have gone bankrupt. The numbers never made sense to me. I sat down at my desk, booted up my encrypted laptop, and logged directly into my secure forensic auditing server. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I ran a deep dive trace on the family company accounts, cross-referencing their asset liquidations from the past 36 months. I bypassed the standard firewalls, pulling the raw ledger data from their corporate filings. Line by line, the financial history populated on my screen. I stared at the shifting columns, red and black. Millions of dollars had been drained in structured, systematic transfers. This was not poor financial management. This was an active, aggressive bleed. Marcus walked into the office carrying 2 cups of tea. He set them down on the desk and stood behind my chair, resting his hands on my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I did not answer. My eyes were locked on a specific routing number that appeared 47 different times in the ledger. I traced the routing number through a global database, watching the funds bounce from Atlanta to a shell corporation in Delaware, and finally landing in a decentralized cryptocurrency wallet based in the Bahamas. I clicked on the authorized signature attached to the offshore transfers. A name popped up in bold black letters. Then a second name appeared as the primary guarantor for the massive high-interest loans that had sunk the family estate. I felt the blood drain from my face. The sheer audacity of the crime unfolding on my screen was staggering. I grabbed Marcus by the wrist and pulled him closer to the monitor. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your parents did not go bankrupt because of the economy. Look at this." He leaned in, his eyes scanning the damning digital trail illuminated in the dark room. He gasped. $4 million, Marcus whispered, tracing a shaking finger across the glowing monitor. He looked at me, his medical background struggling to comprehend the absolute financial slaughter displayed on the screen. "Where did it go, Tasha?" "My father spent 40 hard years building that import business from the ground up. My mother inherited that generational retirement fund from my great-grandfather. How does that kind of wealth just vanish into thin air?" I kept my hands moving swiftly across the keyboard, bringing up the next encrypted layer of decrypted routing data. "It did not vanish," I explained, keeping my tone completely clinical and detached. "Money never just vanishes in these types of corporate structures. It merely relocates." I clicked on a highlighted red transaction block that spanned multiple pages. "Your parents trusted the wrong person with their portfolio. Watch this routing sequence carefully." Marcus watched as a rapid cascade of numbers and destination codes flooded the screen. "I tracked the liquid capital leaving your father's primary corporate account," I said. "It was first diverted into an anonymous shell corporation registered in Delaware. From there, it was broken down into dozens of smaller, untraceable wire transfers, specifically designed to bypass federal reporting limits and banking alerts. Within 48 hours of the initial withdrawal, every single cent was dumped into a decentralized cryptocurrency wallet based out of the Bahamas." Marcus gripped the leather back of my desk chair, his knuckles turning white. "Who authorized this?" I pulled up the digital signature logs and access records. The screen displayed a series of login timestamps and verified IP addresses. I ran a reverse lookup on the primary IP address used to initiate the offshore transfers. It pinged directly to a luxury high-rise building in downtown Atlanta, specifically the penthouse suite leased to your esteemed brother-in-law. Bradley. Marcus growled, his hands clenching into tight fists. "That arrogant parasite stole my family's entire legacy. My mother treats him like royalty because he wears a custom-tailored suit and works on Wall Street, and he has been robbing them blind right under their noses this entire time. It gets worse, I said, pulling up the final set of audited loan documents. I need you to brace yourself for this one, Marcus. Bradley did not just steal their available cash reserves. He leveraged their remaining physical assets to take out massive high-interest loans. That is the exact mechanism that triggered the bank foreclosure on the mansion. But Bradley is a finance guy. He knows exactly how to insulate himself from federal blowback. He did not sign these fraudulent loans himself. I expanded the PDF file of the primary promissory note. Right there on the bottom line was a verified digital signature. Vanessa. Marcus read the name aloud, his voice dropping a full octave in horror. Yes, I confirmed, staring at the screen. Bradley used your sister's digital identity, her social security number, and her equity share in the family business to co-sign every single fraudulent loan. He secured the bag for himself, and he made absolutely sure Vanessa is the one legally on the hook for $4 million of federal wire fraud. If the FBI kicks down a door tomorrow, they are putting handcuffs on your sister, not him. Marcus stepped back from the desk, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. The sheer scale of the betrayal radiated from him. He had spent his entire life watching his mother Vivian and his sister Vanessa elevate Bradley, constantly praising his white-collar prestige while looking down on my foster care background. Now that exact same prestige had financially ruined them and positioned Vanessa for a lengthy federal prison sentence. I am going to kill him, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm and focused. He turned toward the office door, grabbing his car keys from the small side table. I am driving back to that house right now. I am going to drag Bradley out of that dining room by his expensive collar and make him confess to my father. Marcus, wait, I said, standing up quickly to intercept him. You cannot just go over there and start swinging. We need to hand this entire audit over to the proper authorities. If you attack him, you become the criminal. We have the data. We have the proof to destroy him legally. I do not care about the data right now. Marcus fired back, his protective instincts completely overriding his logic. He smiled in my face while eating my turkey. He watched my mother slap you knowing he had stolen everything from her. I am going to break his jaw. Before I could step in front of the door to block his exit, a harsh flash of bright light swept across my office blinds. Headlights cut aggressively through the darkness of our quiet suburban street. The loud roar of a high-performance engine shattered the neighborhood. Silence followed immediately by the violent screech of expensive tires skidding across our concrete driveway. Marcus and I froze in place. The aggressive braking sounded like a heavy vehicle had nearly rammed straight into our closed garage door. Someone is here, Marcus muttered, dropping his keys and moving quickly toward the front hallway. Stay behind me, he ordered, his posture shifting into a defensive stance. Heavy, frantic pounding echoed through the entire house. Someone was slamming their fists against our heavy oak front door, not knocking, but hammering with absolute desperate rage. The doorframe actually rattled under the sheer force of the blows. "Open this door right now!" a shrill, hysterical voice screamed from the front porch. "I know you are in there, you thief. Open the door." It was Vanessa. Marcus unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Vanessa practically fell inside, her designer Christmas dress deeply wrinkled and her expensive makeup smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks. Right behind her stood Bradley, his face flushed bright red, his eyes darting nervously around our brightly lit entryway. He looked nothing like the smug investment banker from an hour ago. He looked like a cornered animal calculating his escape route. Before Marcus could demand any sort of explanation, Vanessa lunged forward with surprising speed. She bypassed her brother entirely and threw herself directly at me, her manicured hands reaching out as if to physically claw my face. Marcus caught her firmly by the shoulders, shoving her backward against the entryway wall to shield me from the attack. "You stole it!" Vanessa shrieked at the top of her lungs, struggling wildly against Marcus's strong grip. "You hacked into our family accounts and you stole our house. My mother just called and told us you bought the deed. You engineered this whole foreclosure just to ruin my life because you are jealous of me. You are a criminal. You hacked the bank to steal our legacy, and I am going to have you locked up for the rest of your miserable life." Marcus shoved his sister backward until her designer heels slipped on the polished hardwood floor. He kept his broad shoulders planted firmly between Vanessa and my desk. "You need to back up right now," Marcus warned, his voice low and vibrating with dangerous intensity. "You do not ever break into my home and attack my wife." Vanessa staggered but quickly caught her balance. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She pointed a trembling manicured finger over Marcus directly at me. "Your wife is a cyber terrorist, Marcus. My mother just checked the county property records. Tasha and her little anonymous corporation are listed as the primary lien holders on our estate. She somehow manipulated the bank registry to forge a foreclosure notice. She hacked the system and stole our family legacy." I remained perfectly still in my desk chair. I did not need to raise my voice or match her hysterical energy. The digital ledger glowing brightly on the computer monitor behind me was all the ammunition I required. "I did not forge anything, Vanessa," I said smoothly. "The bank foreclosed on your parents because they defaulted on $4 million in leveraged loans. Loans that were completely drained from their business accounts by someone sitting very close to you." Bradley finally stepped into the office from the hallway. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke, tailored suit, his posture radiating that specific brand of untouchable white privilege he always wielded like a weapon at our family gatherings. He offered me a condescending, pitying smile, the exact kind a seasoned teacher might give a struggling, foolish toddler. "Tasha, let us be reasonable here," Bradley said, his tone slick and deeply patronizing. "I understand you have a basic community college grasp of bookkeeping, but you are vastly out of your depth right now. You are looking at complex macro-derivative structures and algorithmic liquidity transfers. High-yield offshore asset management is not something a low-level clerk can just hack into and comprehend. You are misinterpreting standard corporate leveraging tactics. What you have done tonight, bypassing bank firewalls to acquire private real estate data, constitutes a major federal crime. I am going to call my contacts at the FBI right now. You will be looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for cyber terrorism." Marcus tightened his fists, his muscles coiling ready to strike, but I placed a calm hand on his arm to stop him. I stood up, walked steadily to the heavy-duty printer sitting on the edge of my bookshelf, and grabbed the thick stack of papers I had printed out just moments before they breached our front door. I walked right up to Bradley. He stood a full head taller than me, clearly expecting me to cower under his authority. Instead, I shoved the 70-page financial audit report directly into his chest. He stumbled backward from the force, reflexively grabbing the heavy binder to keep it from falling to the floor. "You really want to talk about the FBI? Bradley," I asked, my voice carrying the absolute chilling authority of a courtroom prosecutor. "Let us talk about them. I am not a community college bookkeeper. I am the senior external forensic auditor, hired by your investment firm board of directors last Tuesday. They suspected a massive leak in their secondary escrow accounts. They hired my private firm to track it down. You funneled $4 million from your wealthy in-laws to a ghost shell company in Delaware, then washed it through a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange in the Bahamas. You deliberately bypassed the SWIFT banking network to avoid triggering anti-money laundering security flags. I have the receipts. I have the network IP addresses. I have every single digital signature you used to execute the transfers." Bradley lost his smug smile instantly. The healthy color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin looking like pale ash. His eyes darted frantically down to the audit report clutched in his hands, scanning the brightly highlighted transaction records. He knew exactly what he was holding. He knew I had him trapped dead to rights. Vanessa scoffed loudly, stepping forward aggressively to shield her husband from my accusations. "This is completely absurd," she yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. "You fabricated these fake papers just to ruin my marriage. You have always been insanely jealous of me, Tasha. You have always hated that I grew up with immense wealth and privilege while you were bouncing around dirty foster homes wearing cheap hand-me-downs. You simply cannot stand that I married a successful, powerful man who provides me with a luxurious life you could never achieve on your own. You are just a bitter, uneducated orphan trying to tear down a brilliant man who is entirely out of your league." Marcus took a threatening step toward his sister, his expression furious at her cruel insults. but I did not need my husband to defend me. I looked at Vanessa with nothing but cold clinical pity. Successful, I repeated, letting the heavy word hang in the tense air of the home office. You actually think he is successful, Vanessa? Ask your powerful, successful husband why he rapidly liquidated his personal retirement accounts yesterday afternoon. Ask him why he transferred the entire remaining balance of your joint savings account into an untraceable offshore trust fund early this morning. And more importantly, ask him why he booked a one-way first-class ticket to Zurich for tonight. Vanessa froze in her tracks. Her arrogant, sneering expression faltered, immediately replaced by a sudden, terrifying wave of confusion. She blinked rapidly, her spoiled brain struggling desperately to process the damning information I just delivered. I leaned in much closer to her, delivering the final crushing blow without a shred of mercy. Ask him why there is only one ticket, Vanessa. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Vanessa slowly turned her head, looking over her shoulder for Bradley, looking for the man who was supposed to be her impenetrable shield against my accusations. She opened her mouth to ask him about the flight to Zurich, to demand he tell me I was lying. But she was talking to empty space. Bradley was not standing behind her anymore. He was not in the home office. He was not in the hallway. I looked past Vanessa and saw the front door of our house swinging wide open, the freezing night air rushing violently into the entryway. We heard the sudden violent roar of a high-performance engine firing up in the driveway. Expensive tires shrieked aggressively against the cold asphalt. Bradley had dropped the thick audit report onto the hardwood floor and vanished into the dark night, leaving his beloved wife to face the severe federal consequences of his financial crimes entirely alone. Vanessa dropped to the floor. Her knees hit the polished hardwood with a sickening thud. The arrogant facade she had worn like armor for 30 years shattered in a single instant. She scrambled frantically, her acrylic nails scraping against the wood as she desperately searched for the phone she had dropped. Her hands shook so violently she could barely unlock the screen. She pressed his contact name and lifted the phone to her ear. The room was dead silent. We could all hear the automated voice from the speaker. You have reached the voicemail of Bradley. Please leave a message. Vanessa gasped for air like she was drowning. She hit redial. The same automated voice echoed through our entryway. She hit it again and again. With every rejected call, her breathing became more erratic. She curled into a ball on my floor, her expensive Christmas dress twisting around her shaking legs. She was sobbing, a harsh, guttural sound of absolute devastation. He left me, Vanessa wailed, clutching her phone to her chest. He left me here to take the blame. Marcus stared down at his sister. His broad shoulders relaxed slightly, his protective fury melting into a deep, uncomfortable pity. He stepped away from my desk, walking over to where Vanessa lay weeping on the floor. He did not yell. He did not mock her. He played you, Vanessa, Marcus said quietly. He used your name to steal millions, and now he is on a flight to Switzerland while you are sitting in my house waiting for the federal agents to arrive. Before Marcus could reach down to help her up, another set of headlights swept across our living room windows. A heavy luxury SUV pulled aggressively onto the curb, tearing up a section of our front lawn. Car doors slammed shut with massive force. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded up the walkway. Vivian and Jerome burst through the open front door. Vivian was still wearing her extravagant fur coat from the Christmas dinner, her face flushed red with panic and rage. Jerome trailed closely behind her, looking exhausted and thoroughly defeated. Vivian took one look around our entryway. She saw Marcus standing defensively in front of my home office. She saw the heavy audit report scattered across the floor, and then her eyes locked onto her precious golden child weeping uncontrollably on the hardwood. "Where is he?" Vivian demanded, her voice shrill and demanding. "Where is my son-in-law? Where is Bradley?" He left, Vanessa choked out, barely able to form the words through her heavy sobs. "He took the money and he left me. He booked a flight to Zurich." I expected Vivian to drop to her knees and comfort her daughter. I expected the fierce maternal instinct that she constantly bragged about to finally show itself. Instead, Vivian marched directly over to Vanessa, grabbed her violently by the shoulder, hauled her halfway up from the floor, and slapped her across the face. The sharp smack echoed through the hallway. Vanessa cried out in shock, falling back against the wall. "You stupid, incompetent girl!" Vivian hissed, her face contorted with absolute venom. You let a man like that walk out the door. You let him leave you. Mom, what are you doing? Marcus yelled, stepping forcefully between his mother and his sister. He shoved Vivian backward. She is sitting here telling you her husband just framed her for federal wire fraud and you hit her. Jerome finally found his voice, stepping forward weakly. Vivian, please, the neighbors will hear. We need to figure out how to fix this quietly. Fix it quietly. Vivian shrieked, batting Jerome away, as if he were an annoying insect. There is no fixing this quietly if he gets on that plane. Vivian turned her furious gaze toward me. She noticed the thick stack of papers Bradley had dropped. She leaned down, snatched the top page of the audit report, and read the bold heading. Her eyes darted rapidly across the printed financial ledgers, the highlighted offshore routing numbers, and the digital signatures pinning the entire $4 million theft on her daughter. Vivian crumpled the paper in her fist. She marched up to my desk, slamming the crumpled paper down next to my keyboard. You are going to destroy this, Vivian ordered, her tone shifting from hysterical panic to a cold, calculating demand. You are going to log into your little computer right now, delete every single file, shred these papers, and wipe the entire server clean. You will tell the investment firm that you made a mistake. You will blame a glitch in their system. I looked at her, completely unfazed by her commanding tone. You want me to commit corporate fraud to cover up his federal crimes? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Vivian leaned over the desk, invading my personal space. Do you have any idea what will happen to this family if a white financial executive is exposed for embezzling our money? Do you know how hard I worked? How many decades I spent clawing my way into the highest echelons of Atlanta high society? We belong to the most exclusive country clubs. We sit on the boards of elite charities. Bradley gave this family a level of white-collar prestige that money alone cannot buy. If he goes to federal prison, the socialites in this city will exile us. We will be a laughingstock. We will be ruined. I deal in facts, not favors, Vivian, I replied smoothly. And the fact is, your precious prestige was funded by stolen money. Vivian slammed her hands on my desk. You are a nobody, she spat, her eyes wild with desperation. You grew up in the foster system. You are used to having absolutely nothing. If you lose your auditing license, it does not matter. You can just go back to the dirt where you belong. But my daughter cannot go to prison. You are going to sacrifice your career right now to save Bradley and Vanessa. You owe this family for taking you in. I stood up, ensuring I was looking directly down at her. My license is worth more than your entire existence, I stated, enunciating every syllable with absolute finality. I am not destroying anything. The raw data has already been encrypted and backed up to multiple secure servers. That report goes directly to the FBI field office at dawn. Vivian stared at me, the arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a dark, malicious void. She realized in that exact moment that her intimidation tactics were completely useless against me. I was not the weak, grateful orphan she always believed me to be. I was the executioner of her perfect social illusion. Fine, Vivian sneered, stepping back from the desk. A terrifying, unnatural calm washed over her face. She reached into her expensive designer purse and pulled out her smartphone. I did not want to do this, Tasha, but you leave me no choice. She dialed 3 digits and pressed the phone to her ear. She waited 2 seconds before her entire demeanor shifted. Her posture crumbled. Her voice instantly transformed into a shaky, terrified whimper, expertly mimicking the sound of an elderly woman in mortal danger. Help me, please, Vivian cried into the phone, producing real heavy tears on command. We are at my son's house. My daughter-in-law has completely lost her mind. She is holding my daughter hostage and she is threatening us with a weapon. Please hurry, she is going to kill us. Vivian lowered the phone and the terrified tremor in her voice vanished in a split second. She smoothed down the front of her expensive fur coat and offered me a chilling, triumphant smirk. Her performance was flawless. She had spent decades perfecting the art of playing the wounded matriarch to manipulate everyone around her. She looked at Marcus, then back at me, entirely convinced she had just checkmated the poor foster girl. You see, Tasha, Vivian said, her tone dripping with absolute arrogance. Society respects a woman with my standing. When the police walk through that door, they will see a wealthy, terrified grandmother and a violent, unhinged daughter-in-law. You are going to hand over that audit report, or I will press charges and make sure you spend the next 10 years locked in a concrete cell. Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised in disbelief. You just called the police on your own son and his wife. You are willing to send us to jail just to protect a white man who stole your entire life savings. Vivian did not even flinch. Bradley is family, she snapped back. He brings value to the Atlanta elite. What does Tasha bring? Nothing but debt and embarrassment. Red and blue lights suddenly strobed across our living room walls. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the quiet suburban night, growing deafeningly loud before abruptly cutting off right in our driveway. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front walkway. Car doors slammed shut. "Drop the report!" Vivian hissed at me, her eyes wide with frantic intensity. "Give me the papers right now." I kept the heavy binder securely tucked under my arm. I did not move a single muscle. I just watched her panic. "Atlanta police," a deep voice shouted from the open front entryway. Two officers stepped cautiously into our home, their hands resting firmly on their holstered weapons. They scanned the room, their eyes darting from Marcus to me and finally to the floor. The second the officers crossed the threshold, Vivian threw herself onto the hardwood floor right next to the weeping Vanessa. She let out a harrowing, breathless sob, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. "Officer, thank God you are here!" Vivian cried out, her voice shaking violently. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "Please help us. My daughter-in-law has lost her mind. She demanded we sign over the deed to our family estate, and when we refused, she threatened to kill us. She has a weapon hidden in her desk. She physically assaulted my daughter. Look at Vanessa. She is terrified." The taller officer stepped forward, keeping his hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Ma'am," he addressed me, his tone sharp and commanding. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Step away from the desk." I did exactly as I was told. Growing up in the foster care system had taught me how to survive volatile situations, and navigating law enforcement as an African-American woman meant I knew better than to make sudden movements. I slowly raised my empty hands, keeping my palms open and visible. I stepped entirely away from the desk. "Officers, my name is Tasha," I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm and level. "This is my home. My husband Marcus and I are the sole owners of this property. I do not own a weapon. There are no firearms in this house. The woman on the floor is my mother-in-law, and she is lying to you to cover up a massive corporate fraud scheme." Vivian gasped dramatically. "Listen to her lies. She is trying to extort us. Search the house. Arrest her." The second officer moved closer to Vanessa, who was still sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. "Ma'am, did this woman physically harm you?" he asked gently. Vanessa just shook her head, unable to form coherent words, because the reality of Bradley abandoning her was still crushing her chest. She could not even play along with her mother's fabricated story. I kept my eyes fixed on the officers. "You do not need to search my home to find the truth," I stated clearly. "I am a forensic financial auditor. I deal in hard evidence. If you look at the tablet sitting on the kitchen island behind you, you will find everything you need." The taller officer glanced at the tablet, then back at me. He nodded to his partner, who walked over and picked up the device. "I run a synchronized security network throughout my property," I explained. I tapped a button on my smartwatch. The tablet screen flared to life. "What you are about to watch is the interior security footage from my home office, recorded exactly 5 minutes ago. The audio is crystal clear." The officers watched the screen intently. The high-definition footage played back the entire confrontation. They watched Vivian burst into the room. They heard her loud, aggressive demands. They watched her slap her own daughter across the face in a fit of rage. They listened to Vivian explicitly command me to commit corporate fraud, demanding I destroy federal auditing evidence to protect her fugitive son-in-law. And finally, they watched Vivian pull out her smartphone, fake a crying voice, and lie to the emergency dispatcher about being held hostage. The color drained entirely from Vivian's face. She stopped crying. She stared at the tablet in absolute horror, realizing her perfect victim performance had just been completely dismantled by basic technology. But I was not finished. "Since we are establishing a pattern of behavior," I continued, smoothly stepping forward just slightly, "I would like you to see one more piece of evidence." Marcus pulled up the video from Christmas dinner. Marcus did not hesitate. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, unlocked the screen, and handed it directly to the officer. 2 hours ago, Marcus said, his voice thick with suppressed anger. We were at her house for a holiday dinner. I started recording when she began shouting at my wife. The officers watched the second video. The audio of the upscale dining room filled the quiet space of our home. They watched Vivian march around the mahogany table. They watched her raise her hand and slap me violently across the face 3 consecutive times. They heard the sickening sound of the impacts. And then they heard Vivian call my 3-year-old daughter trash, ordering her out of the house. The heavy silence that followed the end of the video was suffocating. The officers handed the phone back to Marcus. Their entire posture had shifted. The initial suspicion they held toward me was gone, replaced by a cold, hardened glare directed entirely at the woman sitting on the floor. The taller officer took a step toward Vivian, pulling a notepad from his uniform pocket. Ma'am, he said, his voice stripped of all previous sympathy. Filing a false police report is a felony in the state of Georgia. Wasting emergency resources to settle a family financial dispute is a serious crime. And based on the video evidence I just watched, we can arrest you for assault and battery right now. Vivian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The pristine, untouchable high society matriarch was suddenly choking on the reality of her own actions. The threat of handcuffs, the threat of being walked out of her son's home in front of the entire neighborhood completely broke her. Jerome, who had been standing silently in the corner this entire time, finally collapsed. He fell to his knees right there on my hardwood floor. The proud director of a family import company, a man who had enabled his wife's toxic behavior for decades, was sobbing into his hands. Tasha, please, Jerome begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Please do not press charges. If she gets arrested, the scandal will ruin whatever is left of our lives. We have lost everything. Bradley took it all. Please, I am begging you, show us some mercy. I looked down at the man kneeling in my home. I thought about the years of microaggressions. I thought about the times he sat silently while Vivian mocked my foster care upbringing. I thought about the stinging pain on my cheek and the way he said nothing when his wife threatened my little girl. I looked down at him, my expression completely void of pity. Get out of my house, I commanded softly. Both of you. The taller police officer did not wait for Vivian or Jerome to respond to my demand. He adjusted his utility belt, his posture rigidly professional, and pointed directly toward the open front door. You heard the homeowner, the officer stated firmly. You are officially trespassing. Move toward your vehicle right now, or you will be leaving this property in handcuffs for filing a false emergency report and attempted fraud. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but the second officer took a purposeful step forward, his hand resting on his cuffs. The threat was clear. The wealthy Atlanta socialite facade had completely dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, humiliated woman who suddenly realized her privilege had run out. Vivian grabbed her designer purse and stumbled toward the exit, not daring to look back at me. Jerome gathered Vanessa from the floor. He wrapped his arm around his weeping daughter, his own face buried in shame, and guided her out into the cold night. The officers followed them down the driveway, making sure they got into their luxury SUV and drove away. When the taillights finally disappeared down the street, Marcus pushed the heavy oak door shut and turned the deadbolt. The sharp click echoed through the silent house. Marcus leaned his forehead against the solid wood, his broad shoulders rising and falling with heavy, exhausted breaths. He looked shattered, deeply devastated by the sheer toxicity his own flesh and blood had just displayed. But when he turned around to face me, there was no hesitation in his eyes. He crossed the entryway and pulled me into a fierce, protective embrace. I am so sorry, Marcus whispered into my hair. I am so sorry I brought that poison into our home. I never knew how far they would go. You protected us, I replied smoothly, resting my hands on his chest. You stood by me when it mattered most. That is the only thing I care about. We walked upstairs together, our footsteps quiet on the carpet, and slipped into Aaliyah's room. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated our daughter, who was fast asleep clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, completely untouched by the storm that had just raged downstairs. Marcus pulled up a small wooden chair next to the crib and sat down, resting his head in his hands. He looked up at me, his expression a mix of awe and lingering shock. How did you stay so calm? He asked softly. My mother was trying to frame you for a felony. She was trying to send you to prison, and you did not even raise your voice. I sat down on the edge of the glider bed, keeping my eyes on Aaliyah. When you grow up bouncing between group homes and foster families, you learn very early how the world works, I explained quietly. I had a foster mother named Miss Loretta when I was 14. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman who saved me from a lot of bad situations. One afternoon, a wealthy white woman in our neighborhood accused me of stealing a package off her porch. The police came to the house, ready to arrest me based on nothing but that woman's word. Miss Loretta did not yell. She just calmly walked over to her porch camera, pulled up the footage, and proved the delivery driver had dropped the package at the wrong house. Marcus watched me intently, hanging on to every word. After the police left, Miss Loretta sat me down at the kitchen table. I continued. She looked me dead in the eye and gave me the best advice of my life. She said the world will always believe a crying rich woman over a quiet black girl. They will look at your background and assume the worst, so you can never rely on the benefit of the doubt. You have to be smarter, faster, and untouchable. Always keep the receipts. I smiled a cold, clinical smile. Vivian thought she could play the victim because she wears expensive pearls and goes to country clubs. But I have been keeping the receipts since the day I met her. Marcus let out a slow breath, shaking his head in sheer respect. Go finish it, he said, his voice full of resolve. Finish the audit. I will stay right here with Aaliyah. I kissed his cheek, stepped out of the nursery, and walked straight back into my home office. I locked the door and sat down at my desk, opening my encrypted laptop. The time for extending grace was officially over. Vivian wanted to play ruthless games, so I was going to show her what a professional execution looked like. I pulled up the 70-page forensic financial audit I had compiled for Bradley's investment firm. I double-checked every offshore routing number, every forged signature Vanessa had blindly authorized, and the exact timestamps of the cryptocurrency transfers in the Bahamas. I compiled the digital logs, the ring camera footage of Vivian's extortion attempt, and the video of her assaulting me at Christmas dinner. I placed everything into a single highly encrypted digital dossier. I logged into the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network portal. I bypassed the standard reporting forms and used my senior auditor credentials to route the submission directly to the regional director's desk. I attached the dossier, typed a brief, factual summary of the embezzlement scheme, and hit submit. There was no going back now. Bradley's Wall Street career was officially dead. Next, I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the Fulton County property portal. I pulled up the deed to the family mansion, the property my anonymous limited liability company had legally purchased out of foreclosure. I had given them a silent grace period out of respect for Marcus. That grace period expired the moment Vivian's hand struck my face. I filled out the official eviction notice, selecting the option for immediate processing. I authorized the county sheriff to serve the papers at dawn. They had 30 days to vacate the premises or their belongings would be tossed onto the street. I paid the filing fee and closed the window. I worked through the rest of the night securing my own firm's servers and ensuring no financial blowback could touch my family. I did not feel tired. The adrenaline of pure calculated justice kept my mind razor sharp. By the time I finished compiling the final backup drives, the sky outside my office window was turning a pale, bruised purple. Morning was breaking over Atlanta. I leaned back in my chair, wrapping my hands around a fresh mug of black coffee, watching the sunlight slowly filter through the blinds. The silence of the house was deeply comforting. The trash had been taken out both figuratively and literally. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the morning quiet. I glanced at the glowing screen resting on my desk pad. The caller ID displayed an official federal government seal and a localized Atlanta area code. I set my coffee mug down, swiped the screen, and lifted the phone to my ear. Tasha speaking, I answered smoothly. Good morning, a stern, authoritative voice replied on the other end of the line. This is Special Agent Miller with the FBI field office in Atlanta. We received your encrypted audit submission regarding the offshore transfers at 4 in the morning. We need you down at the federal building immediately. I did not hesitate. I told Special Agent Harris I would be there in exactly 30 minutes. I ended the call and walked downstairs to find Marcus feeding Aaliyah her morning oatmeal. I kissed the top of my daughter's head and placed my hand on my husband's broad shoulder. "The FBI called," I said quietly. "They received my submission." Marcus immediately stood up, offering to drive me, but I shook my head. "You need to stay here and keep our home secure. I can handle the federal agents." I grabbed my leather briefcase containing the encrypted backup drives and walked out into the brisk morning air. The federal building in downtown Atlanta was a towering fortress of glass and steel. Passing through the heavy security checkpoints felt incredibly validating. For years, Vivian had treated me like a street criminal because of my foster care background. Yet here I was, walking past armed guards as a highly respected forensic expert called in to assist the United States government. A junior agent escorted me to a stark, windowless conference room on the 7th floor. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Special Agent Harris entered a moment later, followed by a female agent who introduced herself as Agent Davis. Harris was a tall, sharp-featured man with intense gray eyes. He did not bother with pleasantries. He dropped a thick manila folder onto the metal table and sat down across from me. "Your audit is one of the most comprehensive digital tracking files I have seen in my 20 years on the job," Harris stated flatly. "You handed us the exact offshore routing sequences we have been trying to pinpoint for months." I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly on the table. For months, I echoed, keeping my tone professional. "You were already investigating my brother-in-law before I submitted the report." Agent Davis leaned forward, opening the folder. "Bradley is not just a greedy relative who decided to empty his wealthy in-laws' retirement accounts. He has been operating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme out of his investment firm for the past 5 years. He targeted affluent older clients across the Southeast, promising them exclusive high-yield returns. When his older investors started demanding their payouts last quarter, the entire pyramid began to collapse. I was desperate for liquid cash to pay off his earliest investors before they went to the authorities. The realization clicked perfectly into place. "That is why he targeted Vivian and Jerome," I said, mapping out the timeline in my head. "He needed an immediate massive cash injection to keep his fraudulent enterprise afloat. He leveraged their physical assets, stole their $4 million, and dumped it directly into the Ponzi structure to buy himself enough time to flee the country." "Exactly," Harris confirmed. "But Bradley is a coward who always leaves himself an exit strategy. He insulated himself by ensuring his name was never on the primary acquisition documents for those specific offshore shell companies. Which brings us to the core issue of why we needed you here so urgently." Davis turned a page in the file and spun it around so I could see it. It was a blown-up image of the digital signature logs I had decrypted the night before. "Because your sister-in-law Vanessa provided her verified digital signatures, her social security number, and her equity backing to establish these shell corporations, federal law views her as an active co-conspirator. She is legally on the hook for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit a federal crime." I stared at Vanessa's signature. The spoiled, arrogant woman who had mocked my handmade Christmas gifts and bragged about her expensive designer bags had blindly signed away her freedom just to maintain the illusion of being a prestigious Wall Street wife. She never bothered to read the paperwork. She just wanted the status. Harris locked his intense gray eyes on me. "We need to establish the extent of the family's involvement." Bradley used the family estate as collateral. Vanessa signed the LLC documents. "We need to know your professional and personal assessment, Tasha. Do you believe Vivian and Jerome were complicit in this Ponzi scheme? Did they knowingly allow Bradley to use their corporate accounts to launder stolen money?" The silence in the interrogation room felt heavy. I could have easily lied. I could have told the agents that Vivian was a mastermind, that she actively orchestrated the entire fraud. It would have been the ultimate revenge against the woman who had slapped me and called my 3-year-old daughter trash just 12 hours ago. It would have guaranteed she spent the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary. But I am not Vivian. I do not operate on malicious lies, and I do not manipulate the truth to serve my own ego. I operate on indisputable facts. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the encrypted hard drives. I placed them firmly on the metal table. "I deal in hard data, Agent Harris," I stated clearly. "The financial data indicates that Jerome and Vivian were grossly negligent and entirely blinded by their own elitism. They handed over their financial autonomy because Bradley is a white man in a custom suit who promised them proximity to power. They were not the masterminds. They were the marks. However, I continued tapping the hard drive with my index finger. What you will find on these drives is a different crime entirely. Last night, Vivian violently assaulted me. More importantly, when she discovered that I possessed the audit proving her son-in-law's federal crimes, she explicitly demanded that I destroy the evidence. She ordered me to wipe the servers and commit corporate fraud to protect her family's social reputation in Atlanta. When I refused, she attempted to extort me by filing a false police report. Agent Davis raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by my absolute refusal to cover for my toxic in-laws. You have evidence of this extortion attempt. I have synchronized audio and high-definition video of the entire encounter, I replied smoothly. It is all neatly categorized in Folder 3. I am officially pressing charges for the assault, and I am handing over evidence of her attempting to destroy a federal investigation. Harris nodded, gathering the hard drives and sliding them into an evidence bag. Thank you for your cooperation, Tasha. Your objectivity in this matter is highly appreciated. You are free to go, but remain in the city. We will likely need you for the grand jury deposition. I stood up, shook hands with both agents, and walked out of the interrogation room. The heavy weight of the past night finally began to lift from my shoulders. I had protected my husband, secured my daughter's future, and handed the absolute truth over to the authorities. I navigated the maze of federal hallways, stepped into the elevator, and rode it down to the ground floor. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out into the bright, blinding Atlanta sunlight. The city was bustling with morning traffic, unaware of the financial earthquake that had just occurred. I took a deep breath of the crisp air and pulled out my phone to call Marcus. Before I could dial his number, a massive black tactical SUV abruptly pulled up to the curb, its tires screeching against the concrete. Two federal agents immediately jumped out of the front seats. The rear door swung open. A woman was practically dragged out of the back seat. Her designer Christmas dress was torn at the shoulder and her expensive hair weave was a tangled, chaotic mess. Thick steel handcuffs bound her wrists tightly behind her back. It was Vanessa. She stumbled forward, her knees buckling as the agents hauled her forcefully toward the federal building entrance. She whipped her head around wildly, her face stained with black mascara and sheer terror. Her frantic eyes locked onto me, standing calmly on the courthouse steps. Tasha, Vanessa screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. Tasha, please tell them I did not do it. Please help me. I did not stop walking. I did not turn my head back toward the federal building or acknowledge the desperate screams echoing across the concrete plaza. Vanessa chose her path the moment she signed those fraudulent documents to fund her luxurious lifestyle, and I was not going to play savior to a woman who had spent years treating me like dirt on her designer shoes. I simply got into my car, drove back to my family, and prepared for the final phase of this financial extraction. 24 hours later, the crisp morning air carried a sharp bite as Marcus and I pulled up to the towering iron gates of the family estate. The sprawling Atlanta mansion looked exactly as pristine and imposing as it had on Christmas Eve, but the power dynamic had completely shifted. We were not arriving as the ungrateful son and the low-class daughter-in-law attending a mandatory holiday dinner. We were arriving as the legal owners executing a lawful eviction. Behind our car idled a black security transport vehicle holding 3 licensed private contractors, followed by a professional locksmith. We stepped out onto the immaculate cobblestone driveway. I handed the lead security contractor the expedited eviction order stamped and signed by the Fulton County judge. The contractor nodded, signaling his team to approach the massive custom oak doors. We did not even need the locksmith to drill the lock. The front doors were already wide open and absolute chaos was spilling out from the grand foyer. I walked across the threshold with Marcus right beside me, our security detail flanking us. The interior of the mansion looked like a disaster zone. The carefully curated elegance of Vivian's high society life was entirely dismantled. Crystal vases were knocked over, Persian rugs were bunched up, and heavy velvet curtains were yanked half off their rods. In the center of the foyer, Vivian was frantically shoving armfuls of designer dresses, expensive handbags, and heavy silver candelabras into giant black heavy-duty trash bags. Her hair, usually sprayed and pinned to perfection, was wild and frizzy. She wore a stained silk robe, her hands shaking violently as she tossed a diamond-encrusted jewelry box into the plastic sack. "You are a thief!" Vivian shrieked the exact second she saw me step into the foyer. She dropped a handful of cashmere sweaters and lunged forward, her face contorted in absolute rage. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You set up my precious daughter to take the fall for Bradley, and now you are coming to steal my house. I will see you rot in hell for what you have done to this family." Before she could get within 3 feet of me, the lead security contractor stepped seamlessly into her path. He raised a firm, commanding hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Ma'am, you need to step back and lower your voice," the contractor stated coldly. "We are executing a legal eviction order. You have exactly 15 minutes to vacate the premises before we physically remove you." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just been physically struck. She looked past the security guard, aiming her fury directly at my husband. "Marcus, are you really going to let your trashy wife throw your own mother out onto the street? I gave you life. I raised you in this house." Marcus did not blink. His posture was rigid, his expression completely void of the guilt she was trying so desperately to extract from him. "You stopped being my mother the second you slapped my wife and insulted my daughter," Marcus replied, his voice completely hollow. "The only reason you are not currently sitting in a federal holding cell next to Vanessa is because Tasha told the FBI the truth about your ignorance. You should be thanking her on your knees. Instead, you are standing here shoving stolen silver into trash bags." Vivian let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, scrambling back to her plastic bags. She violently grabbed a heavy antique silver platter and shoved it into the pile. "These belong to me," she hissed, her eyes darting around the foyer with rabid paranoia. "My family bought these. You are not taking my valuables. I am liquidating these today to pay for an elite defense attorney for Vanessa. We are going to countersue you for every penny you have." I stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of printed documents from my leather briefcase. I signaled the security contractors. "Stop her," I ordered calmly. 2 contractors immediately stepped forward, grabbing the trash bags out of Vivian's hands. She shrieked, fighting to hold on to the plastic, but they easily overpowered her and pulled the bags away. They dumped the contents onto the hardwood floor. Designer clothes spilled out, tangled with heavy silver pieces, expensive modern art sculptures, and diamond necklaces. "You cannot touch my things!" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking as she tried to dive for a diamond necklace. "That is my property." I unfolded the documents and held up the primary page. "This is a federal asset forfeiture inventory list," I stated, speaking loud enough to cut through her hysteria. "Every piece of silver, every expensive sculpture, and every piece of high-end jewelry you bought over the last 36 months was purchased using the funds Bradley stole from those elderly investors. None of this belongs to you, Vivian. It belongs to the federal government. The FBI is arriving this afternoon to seize all these assets to pay back the victims you and Bradley defrauded." Vivian froze. Her hands hovered over the pile of stolen luxury goods. Her chest heaved as the reality of her complete financial annihilation finally set in. "You can take the clothes on your back and whatever personal items you owned before. Bradley started laundering money through your accounts," I said, keeping my gaze locked on her terrified face. "Leave the art, leave the silver, leave the jewelry. If you take a single item off this federal inventory list, I will personally call Agent Harris and report you for stealing government evidence." Vivian fell to her knees amidst the scattered designer clothes, completely broken. Her grand illusion of Atlanta high society dominance was reduced to a pile of cheap plastic trash bags on the floor of a house she no longer owned. Heavy footsteps echoed down the grand sweeping staircase. We all looked up to see Jerome descending the stairs. He was not wearing his usual tailored business suits. He wore a simple pair of jeans and a faded sweater. In his hand, he carried a single worn-out leather suitcase. He walked past the scattered luxury items, ignoring the mess entirely. He stopped directly in front of his wife, who was still kneeling on the floor. Vivian looked up at him, her eyes wide with desperate, pleading hope. "Jerome, tell them to stop," Vivian begged, reaching out to grab his pant leg. "Tell Marcus to call off these guards. Tell them we can fix this. We just need to sell some assets and hire a lawyer. Please, Jerome, do something." Jerome looked down at the woman he had been married to for nearly 40 years. His face held a deep, profound exhaustion, a weariness that went far beyond the events of the past 24 hours. He reached into his pocket and slowly pulled off his heavy gold wedding band. He dropped the gold ring directly onto the pile of designer clothes at her feet. "I am done covering for your toxicity," Vivian Jerome said, his voice quiet, but incredibly firm. "I spent my entire life letting you prioritize status over our own children. I let you belittle Tasha because I was too much of a coward to stand up to your arrogance. I watched you enable Bradley because he gave you a white country club aesthetic, and it ended up destroying our company, our home, and our daughter. I am not doing this anymore. I am done." Jerome stepped around her, gripping his single suitcase tightly. He walked toward the open front doors. He stopped briefly next to Marcus, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You are a better man than I ever was," Jerome whispered, tears pooling in his eyes. "Take care of your family." Jerome walked out the front door, down the cobblestone driveway, and out the iron gates, leaving the estate entirely on foot. He did not look back. Vivian let out a harrowing, soul-shattering wail. She grabbed the gold ring from the pile of clothes and scrambled to her feet, running toward the open doorway. "Jerome," she screamed, her voice tearing through the crisp morning air. "Jerome, come back here. You cannot leave me like this. You cannot leave me with nothing." The security contractors stepped forward gently but firmly, guiding Vivian completely out of the foyer and onto the front porch. They tossed 2 small trash bags containing her basic clothing out onto the concrete beside her. We closed the heavy custom oak doors, the locking mechanism engaging with a solid final click. I stood in the quiet foyer next to my husband, listening to the muffled, desperate sobs of the fallen matriarch, standing completely alone on the driveway. We walked out through the back exit, leaving the property to the security team. I needed to get back to work. The financial fallout of Bradley and his embezzlement scheme was still actively rippling through the federal banking system. I drove straight to my auditing firm in downtown Atlanta. My office was a sanctuary of glass walls and organized ledgers, a sharp contrast to the disaster zone we had just left behind at the family estate. I sat down in my leather chair, opened my laptop, and began sorting through the morning emails. The harsh ringing of my desk phone interrupted my focus. I glanced at the caller identification screen. It displayed a generic automated number originating from the Fulton County Jail. I picked up the receiver. An automated voice informed me that I had a collect call from an inmate. It asked if I would accept the charges. I pressed the button to accept, feeling a cold sense of anticipation settle over me. "Tasha, please do not hang up." The voice on the other end was frantic and stripped of its usual haughty resonance. It was Vanessa. She was sobbing, taking rapid, shallow breaths that echoed loudly over the terrible connection. The golden child of Atlanta high society was calling me from a concrete holding cell. "I am listening," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "They took my shoes." Vanessa wept, her voice cracking with pure disbelief. "They took my shoelaces and they made me strip in front of strangers. It smells like bleach and urine in here. Tasha, you have to help me. You have to pay my bail. The judge set it at $200,000 because I am considered a flight risk due to Bradley running away. I do not have anything. My accounts are totally frozen. You are the only person I know who has liquid cash right now." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. "Why would I pay your bail, Vanessa?" "Because I did not do it," she pleaded. "I swear to you, I did not know what Bradley was doing. He would bring me massive stacks of legal documents while I was getting ready for charity galas. He would tell me they were just standard tax forms for his investment firm. He said the other wives never bothered their husbands about the financial paperwork. He told me if I wanted to keep living in luxury and driving expensive cars, I just needed to sign on the dotted line. I just wanted to maintain my image. I wanted people to respect me. I did not understand I was signing offshore corporate structures and fraudulent loan agreements. He manipulated me." She sounded completely pathetic. The woman who had spent years mocking my background, parading her white investment banker husband around like a trophy, was now begging the poor foster kid to buy her freedom. "You wanted the prestige without putting in the actual work," I stated bluntly. "You let a white man use your black elf from federal scrutiny because you were too obsessed with buying Cartier bags to read a simple contract." Ignorance is not a legal defense. Tasha, please, Vanessa cried, her desperation reaching a new peak. I am your family. Marcus is my brother. You cannot just leave me in this cage. I will not survive in here. I picked up a silver pen from my desk and rolled it between my fingers. Family, I repeated. The word tasted sour. Let us talk about family, Vanessa. Do you remember my baby shower 3 years ago? I do. I remember standing in a room full of my co-workers waiting for my sister-in-law to arrive. You never showed up. You did not even call. The next day you posted photos of yourself drinking champagne on a yacht with Bradley. You told Marcus you simply forgot. I was selfish, she sobbed. I was so selfish. And let us talk about the rehearsal dinner for our wedding. I continued, my voice growing colder with every word. You stood up in front of 50 guests and gave a toast. You said Marcus was so brave for marrying a girl with no lineage. You joked that taking in a foster kid was the ultimate charity project. You laughed while my face burned with humiliation. You loved making me feel small because it was the only way you could feel big. I am sorry, Vanessa wailed. I will do anything. I will apologize publicly. Just please get me out of here. I set the silver pen down. I am not your savior, Vanessa. I am not the magic solution to the mess you created by enabling a criminal. You made your choices based on greed and arrogance, and now you have to face the absolute reality of those choices. Call your mother. I am sure she can scrape together some bail money from the clothes she dragged out of the mansion this morning. Tasha, wait, do not hang up on me. I placed the receiver firmly back onto the base, cutting off her frantic screams. The silence in my office returned thick and peaceful. I had no guilt. Vanessa had built her entire identity on a foundation of stolen money and artificial superiority. The collapse was entirely her own doing. I turned my attention back to my computer screen, ready to finalize the remaining audit files for the federal agents. As my inbox refreshed, a new message popped up at the very top of the list. The sender name was unfamiliar, but the domain name belonged to one of the most ruthless criminal defense law firms in the entire country. I clicked the email. It was from the defense attorney representing Bradley. The subject line read, "Urgent settlement offer regarding Vivian." I stared at the subject line. An urgent settlement offer regarding the woman who tried to destroy me. I clicked it open. The sender was Richard Vance, a senior partner at a ruthless defense firm. He requested a meeting at an upscale Buckhead coffee shop. He stated this conversation would be mutually beneficial for my firm. I forwarded the email to my secure server, grabbed my winter coat, and walked out the door. I arrived at the coffee shop early. Richard was sitting in a leather booth wearing a bespoke suit. He was a white man in his late 50s with cold eyes. He stood up slightly, offering a tight smile. I slid into the booth opposite him, ignoring his extended hand. I placed my phone face down on the table. In Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording. I had hit record the second I walked through the doors. "You are a difficult woman to track down," Tasha, Richard began. "Bradley speaks highly of your technical skills. He says your forensic audit was a masterclass." I kept my face blank. I am not here to exchange compliments with a man representing a federal fugitive. You said you had a settlement offer regarding Vivian. Make your pitch. Richard chuckled. Straight to business. I respect that. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the table. Inside that folder is an exclusive federal auditing contract for your firm. It is a multi-year retainer with a major government contractor. It will quadruple your company revenue overnight. All you have to do is make a tiny adjustment to your final report. I opened the folder. The contract was real and the numbers were staggering. It was the kind of deal that took decades to secure. I looked back up at him. And what constitutes an insignificant adjustment? Richard tapped the table. There is a specific set of secondary ledgers in your possession. They show the exact dates Bradley transferred the funds offshore. We just need you to bury those ledgers. Omit them from your final submission to the FBI. Replace them with a narrative suggesting Vivian and Jerome initiated those transfers themselves using Bradley's terminal. The sheer audacity of his request hit me like a physical blow. I see exactly what you are doing, I said. Bradley knows he is backed into a corner. He knows federal agents have his digital footprint, so he is pivoting to a new legal strategy. He is going to stand before a federal judge and play the innocent white son-in-law, manipulated by a wealthy black family. He is going to claim Vivian and Jerome were the masterminds of the embezzlement scheme, forcing him to execute trades to fund their lavish lifestyle. Richard offered an acknowledging nod. Vivian is already facing assault charges thanks to you, he pointed out smoothly. She evicted you, slapped you, and tried to ruin your life. She represents everything wrong with the elitist class. If she goes down as the mastermind, the jury will absolutely buy it. An arrogant matriarch forcing her daughter's husband to commit fraud to sustain her failing empire. It is a perfect narrative. She goes to prison. Bradley gets a reduced sentence, and you get the contract of a lifetime. Everyone wins. I was right about one thing. Vivian was a monster. She tormented me from the day Marcus brought me home. She looked at my daughter and called her trash. The thought of Vivian sitting in a federal penitentiary for 20 years, stripped of her pearls and country club memberships, sent a thrill of satisfaction through my veins. It would be the ultimate revenge. All I had to do was delete a few files. I could secure generational wealth and eliminate my greatest tormentor. But framing someone for a crime they did not commit crossed a line I swore never to cross. My career as a forensic auditor was built on an unshakable foundation of objective truth. I grew up in a system where innocent black people were framed by people exactly like Bradley and Richard every single day. Vivian was a cruel, toxic woman who deserved to lose her mansion and her social standing. She was not a criminal mastermind. She was just a foolish, prejudiced woman who trusted a white con artist. Protecting the integrity of my work meant protecting the truth, even when the truth protected my worst enemy. I slowly closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. I looked Richard Vance dead in the eyes. I deal in facts, Richard, I said. The fact is, Bradley acted alone. He manipulated two ignorant people, drained their legacy, and tried to leave his wife holding the bag. You think you can walk in here and buy my integrity because you assume I hate Vivian. You are completely wrong. I truly hate liars, and I absolutely despise cowards who try to pin their crimes on black families just to save their own skin. Richard's confident posture cracked. His face flushed an angry red. You are making a massive mistake, Tasha. You are passing up millions of dollars to protect a woman who would gladly throw you in front of a moving train. When we go to trial, we will rip your credibility to shreds. We will bring up your foster care background. We will paint you as bitter. You will walk away with nothing. I picked up my phone from the table. I tapped the screen, stopping the active voice recording. I held the device up so he could see the saved audio file sitting perfectly on my home screen. I smiled, a cold expression that made the high-powered lawyer swallow hard. You just attempted to bribe a federal witness and solicit the destruction of government evidence, I stated clearly. I am sure the FBI will find this exact conversation fascinating. I stood up slowly. I will see you in court. I left the coffee shop without looking back at Richard Vance. The recording of his federal bribery attempt was already uploading to my secure cloud server before I even reached my car. I forwarded the audio file directly to Agent Harris. Bradley and his legal team were officially buried. Now it was time to address the final pillar of Vivian's toxic empire, her social standing. Fast forward exactly 1 week. The Atlanta Heritage Gala was the crown jewel of the winter social season for the Black elite. It was an invitation-only charity event held in the grand ballroom of the city's most historic hotel. This was the exact room where Vivian had spent the last 3 decades, kissing cheeks, flashing her diamonds, and aggressively protecting her status at the top of the social hierarchy. Tonight was no different, at least in her own mind. Despite the fact that her bank accounts were frozen by the federal government, and she was currently living out of 2 suitcases in a cheap roadside motel near the interstate, Vivian refused to miss the gala. She had somehow managed to get her last remaining designer gown dry cleaned. She swept into the ballroom wearing a crimson Oscar de la Renta dress, her chin tilted up, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable wealth. I watched her from the shadows of the mezzanine balcony. Vivian immediately glided over to a circle of the most influential women in Atlanta. I could read her body language perfectly. When one of the prominent judges' wives asked about Jerome, Vivian waved her hand dismissively. She laughed a high-pitched artificial sound that carried over the string quartet. She loudly proclaimed that Jerome was overseeing a massive multi-million-dollar renovation of their estate. She claimed they had temporarily relocated to a luxury penthouse to escape the construction dust. When another socialite asked about Vanessa, noting her unusual absence, Vivian did not miss a single beat. She lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper, claiming Vanessa was on an exclusive month-long spiritual retreat in Sedona. She spun a beautiful tragic tale about how exhausting it was for Vanessa to constantly manage Bradley's high-pressure Wall Street schedule, completely omitting the fact that her daughter was currently sitting in a county jail cell, waiting for a bail hearing she could not afford. Vivian was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She clutched her crystal flute of champagne, desperately clinging to the illusion that she still belonged in this room. But I could see the sweat gleaming on her forehead under the heavy chandelier light. I could see the frantic, terrified energy in her eyes every time someone walked past her. She was a ghost pretending she was still alive. I turned to Marcus. He looked incredible in a tailored midnight blue velvet tuxedo. He offered me his arm, his eyes locked onto the woman who used to be his mother. "It is time," he said, his voice steady and completely devoid of any remaining affection for her. I took his arm. I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that swept the floor, paired with diamond drop earrings I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. We walked down the grand sweeping staircase together. The moment our feet hit the ballroom floor, the entire atmosphere shifted. People noticed Marcus first, the handsome, brilliant trauma surgeon who rarely attended these pretentious events. Then they noticed me. The whispers started immediately. This was the same crowd Vivian had poisoned with lies for years, telling everyone her son had married a charity case, a lowly foster kid who was desperate for their family money. The string quartet seemed to fade into the background as the crowd parted for us. We did not head toward the bar or the silent auction tables. We walked straight toward the center of the room. Vivian caught sight of us. Her artificial smile froze instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a harsh mask. She gripped her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Before Vivian could even attempt to intercept us or weave another lie to her wealthy friends, the lead event organizer spotted me. Cynthia was a powerhouse in Atlanta philanthropy, a woman whose approval dictated social survival. Cynthia completely abandoned a conversation with the mayor to rush across the ballroom floor. "Tasha," Cynthia beamed, extending both hands to grasp mine. "Marcus, you both look absolutely stunning. We are so incredibly honored to have you here tonight. The relief in the organization is just palpable. Words cannot express our gratitude." The women standing near Vivian stared in absolute shock. Cynthia never fawned over anyone, let alone a woman Vivian had branded as uneducated trash. Vivian took a shaky step forward, her eyes darting between Cynthia and me. "Cynthia," Vivian interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "What is going on? Why are you speaking to my daughter-in-law like that?" Cynthia did not even look at Vivian. She kept her warm, grateful gaze fixed entirely on me. "Excuse me for just one moment, Tasha," Cynthia said, squeezing my hands. "I need to make the official announcement before dinner is served." Cynthia turned and marched directly up to the main stage. She stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. A sharp feedback ring echoed through the grand ballroom, instantly silencing the hundreds of guests. Everyone turned their attention to the stage. Vivian stood completely paralyzed, her eyes wide with mounting horror. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cynthia announced, her voice booming through the massive speakers. "As many of you know, our charity faced an unexpected financial crisis this year. We were on the verge of canceling our youth mentorship programs across the city. We were desperate for a miracle." Cynthia paused, gesturing grandly toward the center of the room where Marcus and I stood. "Tonight I am thrilled to share that a miracle arrived." Cynthia continued, her voice ringing with absolute triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses and welcome our brand new platinum sponsor, the woman who single-handedly saved tonight's charity and secured the future of thousands of children with a stunning $500,000 donation. Please join me in thanking the brilliant founder and CEO of Apex Forensic Auditing, Mrs. Tasha." The entire ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Every single face turned toward me with genuine awe and respect. Right next to me, Vivian's fingers went completely numb. The crystal flute slipped from her hand. It hit the polished marble floor and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, but the thunderous applause drowned out the sound entirely. I smiled graciously at the cheering crowd nodding to Cynthia before gracefully stepping off the stage. Marcus caught my hand at the bottom of the stairs. Pride radiated from his smile, a silent confirmation that we had just permanently altered the social hierarchy of the city. I squeezed his fingers and signaled that I needed a brief moment to touch up my lipstick. I navigated the sea of admiring socialites, accepting warm handshakes and breathless compliments as I made my way toward the lavish gilded corridor leading to the restrooms. I knew exactly who would be waiting for me in the shadows. As soon as the heavy velvet curtains fell shut behind me, isolating me from the music and the laughter, a hand shot out from an alcove. Vivian grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging sharply into my silk sleeve. I smoothly twisted my arm, forcing her to release her grip immediately. Vivian stood there breathing heavily. Her crimson designer gown looked suddenly cheap and ill-fitting against the flush of pure, desperate rage spreading across her neck. "You little thief," Vivian hissed, her voice vibrating with a venomous panic. "You think you can waltz into my world and humiliate me? You think no one knows exactly what you are doing? You took the deed to my house, and now you are using my stolen family money to buy your way into Atlanta high society. You are throwing $500,000 at Cynthia just to spite me." I did not step back. I looked at the frantic, delusional woman standing before me. "Your money?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly controlled. "Vivian, the federal government froze your accounts days ago. Your black cards are dead plastic. You are currently sleeping on a polyester bedspread in a motel off the interstate. I did not take your money because you do not have a single dime left to take." Vivian scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively to shield her crumbling ego. "You expect me to believe a foster kid who fixes spreadsheets for a living just happened to have $500,000 sitting around in a checking account? You stole Bradley's offshore accounts. You hacked into our legacy and transferred it to your own anonymous shell companies. That is the only way someone like you gets into a room like this. You are a fraud parading around in stolen diamonds." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed coldly off the marble walls of the corridor. "You are truly obsessed with this illusion," I said. "Let me break it down for you so your country club brain can finally process the math. My firm holds exclusive forensic auditing contracts with 3 major federal agencies and a dozen Fortune 500 companies. Last quarter alone, my personal take-home profit was $7.2 million. I did not need to steal your imaginary wealth, Vivian. I make more in a single afternoon than Jerome's failing import business generated in an entire decade." Vivian stared at me. Her jaw trembled slightly as her delusions of superiority shattered against the hard, unforgiving wall of my reality. "Your entire life was funded by debt and a white con artist," I stated, stepping closer until she was forced to lean back against the flocked wallpaper. "You let Bradley drain your legacy because he gave you the proximity to whiteness you so desperately craved. You thought his tailored suits and Wall Street jargon made you elite. But he was just using you as a convenient shield to run a Ponzi scheme. My life is funded by my own brain. I built an empire from the ground up while you were busy trying to tear me down for not having the right last name." Vivian's face contorted into something ugly and feral. She realized she could not intimidate me with money or status anymore, so she resorted to her only remaining weapon: social sabotage. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You arrogant little rat!" Vivian spat, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "I built this charity event. I know every judge, every politician, and every old money family sitting in that ballroom. They respect me. I will walk right out there, march up to that stage, and take that microphone right out of Cynthia's hands. I will scream to the entire gala that you are a criminal. I will tell them you are under federal investigation for cyber terrorism and that you maliciously extorted your own husband's parents to steal our estate. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every professional circle in Georgia. They will ruin you." She was breathing rapidly, completely convinced that the threat of public humiliation would make me cower. She expected me to beg her to keep her voice down. She expected me to negotiate, to offer her money to stay quiet and protect my newly announced status. This was how she survived in her world, by trading toxic secrets and leveraging reputations. But I was not from her world. I was forged in environments where threats were dealt with head-on without hesitation. I looked at Vivian, taking in her desperate, terrified posture. I did not argue. I did not try to reason with her or justify my presence. I simply took a deliberate step to the side, clearing her path back to the heavy velvet curtains that separated the quiet corridor from the crowded, glamorous ballroom. I gestured smoothly toward the doors with an open, inviting hand. "Go ahead, Vivian," I said, my voice completely devoid of fear. "Walk out there, grab the microphone, tell the most powerful Black people in Atlanta that the woman who just saved their community programs is a fraud. The people in that room do not care about your crumbling lineage anymore, Vivian. They care about action, capital, and survival. You have absolutely nothing left to offer them but a scandal. Let us see who they believe." Vivian stood frozen in the gilded hallway. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The threat to ruin me publicly had evaporated the moment I challenged her to actually do it. She knew the golden rule of Atlanta high society better than anyone: wealth talks and debt walks. Right now, I was the undisputed bankroll of the evening, and she was a tenant who had just been evicted from her own life. I did not wait for her to find her voice. I turned my back on her, pushed through the heavy velvet curtains, and walked back into the dazzling light of the ballroom. Marcus was waiting exactly where I left him. He offered his arm, and I took it just as Cynthia's voice echoed through the sound system once again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cynthia announced, her tone radiating pure excitement, "please direct your attention to the center of the room. It is my absolute privilege to invite our savior tonight to the stage. Tasha, would you please come up and say a few words?" The applause was deafening. It washed over me in waves as I released Marcus's arm and glided toward the stage. My emerald silk gown caught the light, and I felt the collective gaze of the most powerful people in the city, tracking my every movement. I climbed the short staircase, accepted the microphone from Cynthia, and stepped up to the polished acrylic podium. I looked out over the sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering diamonds. The room was packed with politicians, judges, corporate executives, and old money heirs. And then, way in the back, lingering near the exit doors like a shadow trying not to be seen, I spotted Vivian. She had crept back into the ballroom, unable to tear herself away from the spectacle of her own defeat. Her face was ashen. Her hands gripped her cheap evening bag so tightly her knuckles were stark white. I locked eyes with her, ensuring she knew every single word I was about to say was a direct execution of her legacy. "Thank you, Cynthia," I began, keeping my voice steady, warm, and commanding. "And thank you to everyone in this room for such an incredible welcome." When Cynthia and I first discussed this donation, she asked me what inspired me to step in. She asked me what drove my success. I told her the truth. "I am driven by the concept of value." A hush fell over the ballroom. I had their undivided attention. "In circles like this," I continued, my voice carrying easily across the massive space, "we are often taught that value is inherited. We are told that worth is determined by your last name, the zip code of your childhood home, or the pedigree of your ancestors. For a very long time, society tried to tell me I had zero value. I grew up in the foster care system. I bounced between group homes. I wore hand-me-down clothes. I did not have a generational trust fund or a historic family estate to fall back on. I paused, letting the reality of my background sink into a crowd that prided itself on exclusivity. I saw several prominent women nodding slowly, captivated by the raw honesty. Because of my background, I said, my tone sharpening, just a fraction people have eagerly applied labels to me. The most popular label was always the same: trash. I have been called trash by people who stood in mansions funded by someone else's labor. I have been looked down upon by individuals who believed that buying a designer handbag somehow elevated their character. They thought that because I did not inherit a fortune, I was fundamentally less than them. I kept my eyes locked on Vivian. She looked like she was suffocating. She tried to step backward into the hallway, but the crowd was too dense. She was trapped, forced to listen to the poor foster kid command the room she used to rule. "But the foster system taught me something incredibly valuable," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "It taught me how to spot a fake. It taught me how to read numbers, how to analyze data, and how to build an empire out of pure grit. That is why tonight, this $500,000 donation is not just writing a check to clear a conscience. It is the initial seed funding for my new initiative, the Aaliyah Foundation for Fostered Youth. We are going to provide complete financial literacy, forensic accounting, and STEM education to kids who are aging out of the system. We are going to teach them how to build their own tables instead of begging for a seat at someone else's. The ballroom erupted into cheers, but I raised my hand to quiet them. I was not finished. I had one final nail to drive into the coffin of Vivian's elitist delusion. I want to leave you all with one final thought about value, I said, lowering my voice so the room had to lean in to hear me. My gaze remained fixed like a laser on the woman trembling in the back of the room. True trash isn't where you come from. True trash is looking down on an innocent child because of her background, while turning a blind eye to the actual criminals sitting at your own dinner table. The silence that followed was electric. The crowd thought it was a powerful, striking metaphor about societal hypocrisy. They did not know it was a literal description of the woman standing by the doors. But Vivian knew. Her knees visibly buckled. The absolute devastation of knowing her entire social philosophy had just been publicly dismantled completely broke her. Then the applause started again. It began as a slow clap from the front tables and rapidly swelled into a massive roaring standing ovation. People were getting to their feet. The most powerful Black leaders in Atlanta were standing up to applaud the foster kid who had just redefined what power looked like in their city. I smiled and stepped back from the podium, accepting a quick embrace from Cynthia. I looked down at Marcus, who was standing at the edge of the stage, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. His eyes were shining with unfiltered pride. We had won. The toxic shadow of his family had been entirely eradicated by the blinding light of our own success. But the victory lap was abruptly cut short. Over the deafening sound of the applause, a loud, violent crash echoed from the back of the ballroom. The heavy gold-plated double doors of the main entrance burst open with such force that they slammed against the marble walls. The sudden noise made several guests near the back scream in shock. The applause died instantly, replaced by a ripple of confusion and alarm as the crowd parted. The crystal chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the tension radiating from the entrance. Everyone in the ballroom froze, their champagne glasses suspended in mid-air. This was the epitome of a social nightmare, a public spectacle that these elite families usually only whispered about behind closed doors. Standing in the doorway, gasping for air as if she had just sprinted for miles, was Vanessa. She looked absolutely horrific. She was not wearing her usual tailored designer clothes. She was wearing a cheap, wrinkled gray sweatshirt and sweatpants that looked like they had been issued by the county jail. Her bare feet were shoved into basic plastic slides. Her hair was a matted, tangled disaster, and her face was red and swollen from hours of frantic crying. She had clearly just posted bail and raced directly to the hotel without stopping. Vanessa stumbled forward, nearly tripping over her own plastic slides. She shoved past a state senator and a prominent judge, completely oblivious to the elite company she was offending. The smell of the county holding cell seemed to cling to her oversized sweatshirt, a sharp contrast to the expensive perfumes and colognes wafting through the gala. The high society guests recoiled in disgust and horror as the disgraced golden child pushed her way into the immaculate ballroom. Vanessa did not care about the stairs. She did not care about the gala or the dresses or the prestige. Her wild, terrified eyes scanned the room until they locked onto the woman standing frozen near the exit. "Mom," Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing through the silent ballroom with raw, unhinged panic. "Mom, you have to run!" The music died instantly. The string quartet froze with their bows hovering above their instruments as Vanessa's frantic voice shattered the polished elegance of the Atlanta Heritage Gala. Hundreds of guests turned their collective gaze toward the back of the ballroom, watching this disheveled, frantic woman in a county jail sweatshirt sprint toward the disgraced matriarch. Vanessa collided with Vivian, grabbing her mother by the shoulders of her crimson designer gown. Her acrylic nails dug into the expensive silk. "Mom, you have to run!" Vanessa screamed, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. Bradley took a plea deal. Vivian stared at her daughter, her face a mask of absolute, uncomprehending horror. "What are you talking about?" Vivian demanded, her voice cracking. "What plea deal? Where is your husband? He sold us out! Vanessa wailed, her voice carrying across the silent, cavernous room. I just got off the phone with my public defender. Bradley went straight to the federal prosecutors the second he realized his accounts were frozen. He told the feds that you forced him to steal the money. He told them you orchestrated the entire Ponzi scheme to fund your lifestyle because my father's business was failing. He gave them forged emails, Mom. I made it look like you were the mastermind, and he was just a terrified employee following your orders. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of politicians, judges, and corporate executives. The scandalous details of the embezzlement were suddenly being broadcast live in the middle of their charity dinner. They issued a federal warrant for your arrest, Vanessa cried, shaking her mother violently. They are coming for you tonight. You have to get out of here. Vivian stumbled backward. The sheer calculated cruelty of Bradley's betrayal hit her like a physical blow. The prestigious white Wall Street executive she had practically worshipped, the man she had elevated above her own flesh and blood. The man she had allowed to drain her generational wealth had just served her up on a silver platter to the United States government to save his own skin. He had played her for a fool from the very beginning. Vivian's eyes darted wildly around the room. The reality of a federal prison sentence finally pierced through her delusions of grandeur. Panic set in. Pure primal panic. She turned frantically to the circle of elite socialites she had been desperately trying to impress just 10 minutes earlier. Cynthia, Vivian pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand toward the event organizer. Cynthia, you know me. You know I do not understand corporate finance. I do not even know how to log into a cryptocurrency wallet. You have to help me. Let me use your driver to get out of the city. Hide me at your estate in Buckhead until I can secure a lawyer. Cynthia looked at Vivian with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The powerful philanthropist did not say a single word. She simply took a very deliberate, highly visible step backward. Vivian gasped. She turned to a prominent judge's wife standing to her left. Diane, please, Vivian begged, her voice shrinking into a pathetic whimper. We have been in the same country club for 20 years. We vacation together. Please just give me the keys to your car. I cannot go to a federal holding cell. Diane scoffed, pulling her expensive fur wrap tightly around her shoulders. She stepped backward, mirroring Cynthia's movement. Then the entire circle of women physically stepped away from Vivian. They treated her like she was radioactive. The social exile was instantaneous and absolute. These were people who survived by protecting their own reputations at all costs. Aligning with the newly minted federal fugitive was social suicide. Vivian was officially a pariah. I stood on the grand stage watching the total collapse of Vivian's empire from the best vantage point in the room. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs, his arms crossed over his chest, his face completely devoid of pity. His mother was reaping the exact harvest she had sown. I reached into my emerald silk clutch and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated in the dim stage lighting. I unlocked the device and opened my secure audio files. Right there at the top of the list was the crystal-clear, legally recorded conversation I had with Richard Vance, Bradley's high-powered defense attorney. I had his explicit admission that Bradley was planning to frame Vivian as a scapegoat. I had the undeniable, hard evidence that would completely exonerate Vivian from the mastermind charges. I held her salvation in the palm of my hand. All I had to do was walk down those stairs, hand the phone to a police officer, and Vivian would be cleared of the heaviest federal charges threatening to lock her away for the rest of her life. I looked down at the phone, and then I looked at Vivian. I remembered the burning sting of her hand slapping across my cheek. I remembered the venom in her voice when she looked at my 3-year-old daughter and called her trash. I remembered the decades she spent looking down on my foster care background, treating me like a criminal simply because I was not born into wealth. I pressed the lock button on my smartphone. The screen went black. I slid the phone back into my silk clutch and snapped it shut. I possessed the evidence to clear her, but the truth did not need to be rushed. Vivian needed to sweat. She needed to feel the absolute suffocating terror of being stripped of her privilege. She needed to experience the exact same helplessness I felt when I was a child, bouncing around the foster system completely at the mercy of a cold, unforgiving authority. I decided in that moment to let the federal justice system do its job. I would hand over the recording eventually, but tonight, Vivian was going to pay the entry fee for her arrogance. Vivian spun around in circles, completely surrounded by a wall of former friends who refused to make eye contact with her. She was hyperventilating, grabbing at her hair, desperately looking for an exit strategy that no longer existed. Suddenly, the heavy gold-plated double doors of the ballroom burst open for a second time. The loud crash echoed off the marble pillars. The crowd gasped again, pulling back rapidly toward the edges of the room to clear the main aisle. Heavy tactical boots slammed against the polished floor. A dozen federal agents stormed into the grand ballroom. They were not wearing standard suits. They were wearing full tactical gear, heavy Kevlar vests, emblazoned with bright yellow FBI lettering across their chests. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. "Nobody move, the lead agent," roared his voice, cutting through the panic like a blade. The agents unclipped heavy-duty flashlights from their tactical belts, clicking them on simultaneously. Blinding beams of harsh white light swept aggressively through the glamorous crowd, cutting through the dim romantic ambiance of the charity gala. The beams bounced off crystal chandeliers and diamond necklaces, creating a dizzying, chaotic strobe effect across the terrified faces of Atlanta's elite. The flashlight swept across the terrified socialites, moving methodically through the crowd until all 12 beams of blinding light stopped and converged on one single target. The spotlights locked directly onto the woman in the crimson designer gown standing paralyzed at the back of the room. The piercing white beams of 12 tactical flashlights remained fixed on Vivian. For a fraction of a second, the grand ballroom was entirely silent, save for the heavy breathing of the federal agents advancing down the main aisle. Vivian stood frozen in her crimson designer gown, her eyes wide with a terror that finally matched the severity of her crimes. Then the lead agent broke the silence. "Vivian, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tax evasion, and receiving stolen federal funds." The reality of those words shattered Vivian's paralysis. The pristine, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society vanished, replaced instantly by a cornered, frantic animal. As the agents closed in, she shrieked, batting her arms wildly in the air. She slapped at the hands of the first agent who reached for her wrists. "Do not touch me," she screamed, her voice echoing violently off the crystal chandeliers. "I am a respected member of this community. I am a philanthropist. You have the wrong person. It was my son-in-law. He lied to you." The agents did not entertain her hysteria. Two of them stepped forward, grabbing her arms with practiced, unyielding force. Vivian kicked out her expensive heels, slipping on the polished marble floor. She thrashed against their grip, her carefully styled hair falling into a messy, chaotic tangle around her face. She looked past the agents, her frantic eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Marcus. "Marcus, do something!" Vivian wailed, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. "You are a doctor. You know these judges. Tell them who I am. Tell them your mother is innocent. Do not just stand there and let them treat me like a common street criminal. Call our lawyers. Marcus, save me." Marcus did not flinch. He stood at the edge of the stage, his hands resting casually in the pockets of his tailored tuxedo. He looked at the woman who had spent his entire life valuing prestige over her own children. He looked at the woman who had violently slapped his wife and demanded his 3-year-old daughter be thrown out into the cold. Marcus slowly shook his head. He turned his back on Vivian, completely walking up the short stairs to stand firmly by my side. He took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine, presenting an impenetrable, unified front. The sheer finality of her son turning his back drained the fight right out of Vivian. The agent swiftly forced her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around her wrists resonated through the silent ballroom. It was the sound of an empire officially collapsing. "Walk," the lead agent commanded, steering her forcibly toward the exit. The perp walk that followed was a masterclass in social execution. Vivian was paraded straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, forced to walk past every single politician, judge, and corporate executive she had spent decades trying to impress. Her former friends did not just look away. They stared with active, unfiltered disgust. They watched the mighty matriarch being hauled out in chains. As the agents pushed her through the heavy gold-plated double doors of the grand entrance, Vivian stumbled. The delicate, expensive silk of her crimson designer gown caught violently on the sharp metal edge of the doorframe. She jerked forward and the fabric ripped with a loud, sickening tear. The dress split straight up the side, exposing her bare leg and ruining the garment completely. She gasped, trying to cover herself with her handcuffed hands, but she could not reach. The agents marched her out into the grand lobby of the hotel, where dozens of other guests and hotel staff stopped dead in their tracks to watch the spectacle. Vivian hung her head, weeping openly, now stripped of every single ounce of her dignity, wealth, and power. She was shoved into the back of a black tactical vehicle, the door slamming shut on her life of luxury forever. Back inside the ballroom, the heavy silence remained. Vanessa was still kneeling on the marble floor near the entrance. Her jail-issued sweatpants soaked with the tears she had shed watching her mother get hauled away. She looked around the room, realizing she was now entirely alone. Her white knight investment banker husband had sold her out to the federal government. Her powerful mother was on her way to a holding cell. Her father had packed a single suitcase and vanished. She had absolutely no one. Vanessa slowly crawled across the polished floor. She dragged herself toward the stage, stopping right at the bottom of the stairs where Marcus and I stood. She looked up at me, her face a swollen, unrecognizable mess of grief and defeat. "Tasha, please," Vanessa begged, her voice a pathetic, raspy whisper. "I have nothing. They froze my accounts. They took my house. I do not have a place to sleep tonight. I do not have money for food. Please, you have to forgive me. I will do whatever you want. I will be your assistant. I will clean your house. Just please do not leave me on the street." I looked down at the woman who had made my life a living hell. I remembered the baby shower she refused to attend because she felt my friends were beneath her. I remembered the snide, racist microaggressions about my foster care upbringing. I reached into my emerald silk clutch and pulled out a simple, stark white business card. I walked down the stairs and handed it to her. Vanessa looked at the card with trembling hands. It was the contact information for the Fulton County Public Defender's Office. "I am not your savior, Vanessa," I stated, my voice cold and absolute. "I am not going to fund your redemption arc. You wanted to play the role of the arrogant, untouchable elite. Now you get to play the role of a broke federal suspect. Take the card, start over, honestly this time." I turned around, took Marcus by the arm, and we walked out of the ballroom together, leaving Vanessa sobbing on the floor holding a free lawyer's business card. The charity gala resumed its programming, but the night belonged entirely to us. We went home, checked on our sleeping daughter, and finally exhaled. The toxic rot had been completely excised from our lives. But the justice system was not quite finished with me. The next morning, the crisp winter sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. I was pouring a fresh cup of coffee when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. Marcus opened it to find a man in a plain gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. The man asked for me by my full legal name. I stepped forward and he handed me the envelope before turning and walking away without another word. I tore open the seal and pulled out a heavy stack of official watermarked documents. It was a federal subpoena. The United States Department of Justice was officially ordering me to appear in federal court. I was being called to testify under oath as the primary expert forensic witness in the criminal trial against Bradley and Vivian. The crisp winter morning melted into a grueling 2 months of relentless legal warfare. The United States Department of Justice had officially named me their primary expert forensic witness in the federal wire fraud case against Bradley and Vivian. Preparing my testimony became a full-time obsession. I spent 18 hours a day locked in my home office, meticulously reviewing the offshore routing numbers and verifying every digital signature Vanessa had blindly authorized. The stakes were astronomical, and Bradley's defense team knew it. They launched an aggressive, coordinated smear campaign to shatter my professional credibility before I ever stepped foot inside a courtroom. Richard Vance, the ruthless attorney, who had tried to bribe me at the coffee shop, filed motion after motion to unseal my juvenile records. He wanted to parade my foster care background in front of a federal judge. He leaked fabricated stories to Atlanta business journals, planting vicious rumors that I was a bitter, unstable orphan carrying a lifelong vendetta against affluent families. His strategy was entirely predictable. He wanted to paint the wealthy white investment banker as a victim of a targeted malicious audit conducted by a vengeful black woman. The pressure was designed to make me break, to make me doubt the bulletproof financial data I had compiled. But I did not break because I had an unshakable anchor. Marcus stood between me and the mounting media chaos like a brick wall. He screened every phone call, intercepted the harassing legal summons, and made sure our daughter Aaliyah never felt an ounce of the tension suffocating our home. One Tuesday evening, while I was buried under a mountain of printed bank statements, Marcus walked into my office. He did not bring me dinner or ask me to take a break. He quietly placed a manila envelope on top of my keyboard. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of watermarked legal paper. It was a certified court decree, signed by a Fulton County judge. Marcus had legally petitioned to drop his surname. He had officially adopted my maiden name. I stared at the document, my vision blurring with fresh tears. The prestigious family name his mother had weaponized for decades, the name she used to demand obedience and project fake superiority, was gone. Marcus looked at me with absolute clarity. He told me that his legacy did not start with a toxic mansion built on stolen money. He said his legacy started the day he met me. He severed his identity from their corruption, completely standing shoulder to shoulder with the foster kid they had all tried to destroy. That profound act of loyalty fueled me with a cold, terrifying focus for the official pre-trial deposition. The deposition took place in a sterile, heavily guarded conference room at the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. I sat on one side of a long mahogany table, flanked by two sharp federal prosecutors. On the opposite side sat Bradley, looking severely diminished. He was no longer wearing his bespoke tailored suits. He wore a standard-issue gray county jumpsuit, his blonde hair looking dull and unwashed. Richard Vance sat right beside him, radiating a smug, predatory confidence. The moment the court reporter activated the recording equipment, Bradley launched into a rehearsed, sickening performance. He slumped his shoulders and allowed actual tears to well up in his eyes. He spun a ridiculous, offensive narrative designed to trigger the sympathies of the legal system. He claimed he was completely innocent of the embezzlement. He painted himself as a naive, hard-working financial advisor who had been mercilessly bullied and coerced by a powerful, domineering black matriarch. He insisted Vivian had threatened to destroy his marriage to Vanessa and ruin his reputation if he did not blindly execute the offshore transfers she demanded. Bradley actually choked back a sob as he described the intense psychological abuse Vivian allegedly inflicted on him behind closed doors. He weaponized every harmful stereotype imaginable, portraying my mother-in-law as an aggressive, terrifying mastermind who held his white-collar career hostage. Richard Vance nodded along sympathetically, guiding his client through the fabricated tale of woe. Their entire legal defense hinged entirely on making the jury believe that the elite, educated white man was simply a terrified victim of an overbearing black family. I sat perfectly still, letting him complete his pathetic, tearful monologue. The federal prosecutors next to me took furious notes, clearly frustrated by the well-crafted emotional manipulation. They knew how easily a jury might buy this specific narrative. Bradley finished speaking, wiping a solitary tear from his cheek, and looked across the table at me with a microscopic, arrogant smirk. He thought he had outsmarted the audit. I thought he had successfully redirected the federal crosshairs entirely onto Vivian. I did not look at Bradley. I looked directly at his high-priced attorney. I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved a small encrypted digital audio player. I placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany table. I looked Richard Vance dead in the eyes and informed the room that I had a piece of supplementary evidence to submit into the official legal record. I pressed the play button. The crisp, unmistakable audio of Richard Vance's voice filled the sterile conference room. The recording captured him explicitly detailing their corrupt legal strategy. It played the exact moment he admitted Vivian was not the mastermind, clearly stating that framing her as an aggressive matriarch was simply a convenient racist narrative designed to guarantee Bradley a reduced sentence. The audio captured Richard offering me millions of dollars in federal contracts to destroy government evidence. I stopped the recording and slid the small device across the mahogany table. Bradley's pathetic fake tears vanished instantly. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, terrifying shade of white. The smug confidence completely evaporated from Richard Vance's posture. Their entire defense strategy had just crumbled to dust right before their eyes. The deposition room had been a quiet slaughter, but Bradley was too arrogant to accept a plea deal. Against the frantic advice of his own legal team, he refused to surrender. He genuinely believed that his polished Wall Street charm and his status as a wealthy white man could still hypnotize a federal jury. 2 months later, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse in Atlanta swung open for the main event. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. Local news reporters, former high society friends of Vivian, and federal observers filled every available wooden bench. Bradley took the stand first. He wore a conservative gray suit, his hair neatly parted, projecting the image of a humble, cooperative citizen. For 2 agonizing hours, he lied through his teeth. He weaponized his tears, his voice breaking at perfectly calculated intervals. He told the jury that he was trapped in a toxic, terrifying dynamic. He claimed Vivian demanded millions to sustain her country club lifestyle and threatened to ruin his career if he did not comply. He painted himself as a terrified financial advisor, desperately trying to keep his family together, while a domineering black matriarch forced his hand. The jury leaned in, hanging on his every word. Richard Vance paced the courtroom floor, looking incredibly smug, confident that their racialized scapegoat strategy was working flawlessly. Then the federal prosecutor called my name. I walked past the defense table, feeling Bradley's cold glare on my back, and took the stand. I placed my hands flat on the wooden surface in front of me and adjusted the microphone. The prosecutor asked me to detail my involvement as the senior forensic auditor. I did not shed a single tear. I did not use emotional adjectives. I systematically, coldly, and brilliantly broke down the entire financial architecture of the embezzlement. I directed the jury to the large digital screens mounted around the courtroom. I walked them through the exact timeline of the fraud. I showed them how the initial $4 million was drained from Jerome's import business and routed through a Delaware shell company. I broke down the complex blockchain transfers, explaining how the cryptocurrency was tumbled through multiple offshore exchanges to mask its origin. Then I pulled up the digital signature logs. I pointed out the specific IP addresses, proving that every single fraudulent loan document, including the ones bearing Vanessa's name, was executed from Bradley's private network terminal in his penthouse. He had forged his own wife's signature to shield himself from federal liability. Richard Vance jumped up from his seat, objecting frantically, trying to disrupt the steady flow of undeniable data. He claimed the data did not disprove the fact that Vivian ordered the transfers. The judge firmly overruled the objection. The prosecutor then asked me about the defense's primary claim, the assertion that Bradley was acting under duress and that Vivian was the criminal mastermind. I looked directly at the jury and stated that the claim was a complete fabrication. The prosecution entered the next exhibit into the official record. It was the audio file I had captured at the coffee shop. Despite Richard Vance's desperate attempts to have it suppressed, the judge allowed it under Georgia law. The crisp audio of Vance offering me a massive federal contract to destroy government evidence echoed through the massive courtroom. The jury heard him explicitly detail their legal strategy to frame Vivian simply because an arrogant matriarch made a convenient, racially biased scapegoat. Bradley's face went completely white. He slumped back in his chair as his entire defense strategy burned to the ground right in front of him. But I did not stop there. I turned to the judge and presented the final layer of my forensic audit. I displayed the administrative access logs for the offshore accounts. I explained that to be a mastermind of a decentralized cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme, a person requires distinct technical privileges and highly secure authentication keys. I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Vivian possessed none of these. She did not even have the basic login credentials for her own primary banking portal. I provided irrefutable evidence that Vivian was entirely ignorant of the mechanics of the crime. She was a willing, superficial beneficiary of the stolen money, blissfully spending it on designer dresses and charity galas. But she lacked both the access and the intellect to orchestrate the fraud. I had just handed the federal government the exact evidence needed to lock Bradley away for decades. But simultaneously, I had completely dismantled the prosecution's heavy mastermind charges against my own mother-in-law. A stunned silence washed over the gallery. Even the prosecutor looked slightly taken aback by the sheer unwavering objectivity of my testimony. The federal judge, a stern man who had presided over hundreds of complex fraud cases, leaned forward over his high mahogany bench. He looked down at me, lacing his fingers together. He asked me a question that everyone in the packed courtroom was silently wondering. He asked why I would voluntarily provide forensic evidence that actively cleared the mother-in-law who had physically assaulted me, evicted me, and tried to ruin my life. I looked up at the judge, my expression completely unreadable and my voice steady enough to reach the furthest corners of the room. I told him it was because the truth does not bend for revenge, Your Honor. I deal in facts, not emotions. The silence in the federal courtroom following my testimony was absolute. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked back to the gallery, taking my seat next to Marcus. The prosecution rested their case entirely on the forensic data I had provided. Richard Vance attempted to deliver a passionate closing argument, but his words rang completely hollow. He had nothing left to leverage. The jury did not even need to break for dinner. They deliberated for exactly 4 hours before informing the bailiff they had reached a verdict. The heavy wooden doors opened and the 12 jurors filed back into the jury box. The tension in the room spiked. The judge asked the defendant to stand. Bradley stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket one last time. He still carried that faint, lingering aura of invincibility, genuinely believing the system would protect him. The jury foreman stood and read the charges. On the first count of federal wire fraud, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the second count of money laundering, guilty. The foreman continued reading down the list, methodically confirming the financial slaughter. Count after count, the word guilty echoed through the grand courtroom 14 consecutive times. Bradley physically collapsed into his chair before the judge even gave him permission to sit. The color drained from his face entirely. The arrogant, untouchable investment banker was suddenly choking on the reality of his own destruction. The judge did not hesitate. He looked down from his elevated bench with zero sympathy. He cited the predatory nature of the Ponzi scheme, the manipulation of elderly investors, and the cowardly attempt to frame his own in-laws. The judge brought his heavy wooden gavel down and sentenced Bradley to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Richard Vance immediately closed his briefcase, snapped the locks shut, and walked away from the defense table. He did not even pat Bradley on the shoulder. The elite legal defense evaporated the second the check stopped clearing. 2 federal marshals stepped forward, grabbed Bradley by the arms, and hauled him toward the holding cells. He looked back at the gallery, searching for any sympathetic face, but found absolutely no one. The judge then turned his stern gaze toward the second defendant. Vivian stood up slowly. She was trembling so violently, she had to grip the edge of the defense table to keep herself upright. Because of my meticulous forensic audit, the prosecution had officially dropped the federal mastermind and conspiracy charges. I had proven her technical ignorance, saving her from a 20-year prison sentence. But ignorance of a crime does not grant absolute immunity from the consequences of spending stolen money. Vivian, the judge, stated, his voice ringing with cold authority. You did not orchestrate this massive financial fraud. The evidence presented by the prosecution's expert witness clearly demonstrates your lack of technical involvement. However, your willful blindness and insatiable greed allowed this scheme to flourish under your own roof. You happily ignored massive red flags to fund a lavish, superficial lifestyle using money stolen from hardworking citizens. The judge read the finalized charges. Vivian was convicted of felony tax evasion and the receipt of stolen federal property. The judge handed down her sentence. She avoided federal prison, but her punishment was meticulously designed to destroy the only thing she actually cared about: her elite social standing. Vivian was sentenced to 3 years of strict supervised federal probation. She was ordered to complete 1,000 hours of grueling manual community service. She would no longer be attending charity galas in designer gowns. She would be wearing a neon orange vest, picking up trash along the blistering hot Georgia highways in full view of the public. Finally, the judge ordered absolute financial restitution. Vivian was legally bound to repay every single penny she had spent from the offshore accounts. The federal government would garnish her wages and seize any future assets until the debt was satisfied. She was officially and permanently ruined. The court was adjourned. Marcus placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowded gallery and out the heavy courtroom doors. We bypassed the swarm of local reporters and camera crews waiting in the lobby, declining to give any statements. The hard data had already done all the talking. We stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding Atlanta sunlight. As we walked down the wide concrete steps toward our vehicle, a small, fragile figure stepped out from behind a massive stone pillar blocking our path. It took me a full 3 seconds to recognize her. It was Vivian. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, imposing matriarch who had slapped me at Christmas dinner. She was wearing a cheap, faded gray polyester tracksuit, the fabric pilled around the collar. Her feet were shoved into scuffed-off brand sneakers. Her hair, once professionally styled every single morning, was pulled back into a messy, uneven knot. She wore no makeup, exposing the deep, exhausted lines etched into her face. She looked small, broken, and entirely insignificant. Vivian stood in front of me, her hands wringing nervously together in front of her cheap tracksuit jacket. She looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. Her jaw trembled as she fought a fierce internal battle. She was choking on her own pride, suffocating on the reality that the uneducated foster kid she had tormented was the sole reason she was not wearing a federal prison jumpsuit today. She forced her head up, her eyes swimming with bitter, resentful tears. "Thank you," Vivian whispered, her voice cracking painfully. The words sounded like they were physically tearing her throat apart. I stopped walking. I looked at the woman who had spent years trying to convince me I was nothing. I did not smile. I did not offer her a gracious nod. I did not accept her apology or offer any words of healing. I looked at her with absolute chilling indifference. I simply stepped around her, took Marcus by the hand, and kept walking to our car. I left her standing on the concrete steps, completely invisible and utterly alone. Exactly 1 week later, the morning air was sharp and clear. I stood at the end of the long cobblestone driveway, staring up at the massive, imposing Atlanta mansion. The estate was completely silent. The wrought iron gates were locked open. A heavy-duty pickup truck pulled up to the curb. A general contractor stepped out, unrolling a large set of architectural blueprints across the hood of his truck. He walked over to me, looking up at the sprawling, extravagant property. "Are you sure about this?" the contractor asked, adjusting his hard hat. "The foundation is solid, but gutting the interior like this is a massive job." I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the original notarized deed to the property. I handed the heavy parchment paper directly to the contractor. I looked at the grand mahogany doors, remembering the night I was violently ordered to take my daughter and leave. "I am absolutely sure," I stated, my voice echoing with finality across the empty driveway. "Tear down the walls, tear up the floors. We are redesigning the whole thing." Exactly 1 year later, the crisp winter air wrapped around the sprawling estate, just as it had on that fateful night. But everything else had completely changed. The heavy, imposing iron gates that used to stand as a barrier to keep the working class out were now permanently locked open. The dark, oppressive mahogany doors had been replaced with bright, welcoming glass, and planted firmly on the manicured front lawn, illuminated by warm golden spotlights, was a massive stone sign. It read the Aaliyah Center for Fostered Youth. The interior of the mansion was unrecognizable. We had completely gutted the sterile, pretentious architecture that Vivian had spent decades curating. The walls that once echoed with racist microaggressions and elitist demands had been knocked down to create a massive open-concept living and dining space. Tonight was Christmas Eve. The grand foyer did not smell like expensive forced perfumes or cold catered salmon. It smelled like roasted turkey, baked macaroni and cheese, and fresh pine from the towering, mismatched Christmas tree standing proudly in the corner. I stood near the massive stone fireplace, watching the room buzz with genuine, untainted life. Marcus and I were hosting our very first annual holiday dinner for aged-out foster youth. There were 50 young adults in the room, teenagers and early 20-somethings, who had been pushed out of the system without a safety net. Tonight they had a home. They were laughing loudly, passing heavy plates of food, and sharing stories without any fear of judgment. There was no dress code. There were no fake smiles or calculated social maneuvers. There was only warmth. I looked across the room and saw Marcus sitting at the head of a long rustic wooden table. He was not wearing a stifling custom tuxedo. He wore a comfortable knit sweater with his sleeves rolled up, completely engrossed in a conversation with a 19-year-old boy who wanted to study medicine. Marcus was leaning in, listening intently, treating the young man with the exact kind of respect and dignity his own mother had always refused to give to anyone outside her tax bracket. Marcus caught my eye across the crowded room and offered a bright, relaxed smile. The heavy burden of his family legacy was entirely gone from his shoulders. We had built a sanctuary out of the ruins of their greed. But while we were surrounded by laughter and light, the people who used to rule this estate were living the absolute reality of their choices. We had heard through the legal grapevine that Jerome had moved to a tiny rural town in upstate South Carolina. He lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store where he worked the morning shift. For the first time in 40 years, he did not have to wear a suit or pretend to be a titan of industry. He did not have to cover up for his wife or enable her toxic abuse. He spent his afternoons sitting on a quiet porch drinking black coffee in complete silence. He had lost his fortune and his family, but he had finally found peace. Vanessa was learning a much harsher lesson in reality. Stripped of her fraudulent shell companies and her stolen luxury vehicles, she was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The woman who used to mock my handmade gifts and brag about $10,000 Cartier bags was now working double shifts as a waitress at a 24-hour diner. She spent her days wiping down sticky tables and carrying heavy trays of greasy food just to slowly chip away at the massive mountain of legal debt she owed. There were no charity galas for her anymore. There were only aching feet and the bitter, suffocating taste of humility. And then there was Vivian, the mighty, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society. The federal judge had meant every single word of his sentence. Vivian was not serving her time in a comfortable country club prison. On this freezing Christmas Eve, while the socialites she used to rule were sipping champagne at their exclusive holiday parties, Vivian was standing on the shoulder of Interstate 85. She wore a bright neon orange safety vest over a bulky, stained winter coat. The bitter wind whipped her messy graying hair across her face as cars flew past her at 70 miles an hour, kicking up dirt and exhaust fumes. She held a sharp metal grabber in one hand and dragged a heavy, thick, black plastic garbage bag with the other. She spent her holiday hunched over in the dirt, picking up crushed soda cans, fast food wrappers, and cigarette butts. The woman who had proudly called me trash was now legally obligated to collect it from the side of the highway for everyone to see. I pulled my attention away from the memories of their downfall and focused on the beautiful reality right in front of me. I walked over to the large Christmas tree where my 4-year-old daughter, Aaliyah, was sitting on a soft rug, surrounded by a group of smiling teenage girls. Aaliyah was giggling uncontrollably as she tore the colorful wrapping paper off a handmade wooden dollhouse. One of the older girls had spent weeks building and painting it just for her. It was not a designer gift bought with stolen money. It was a gift crafted with actual love. I felt two strong arms wrap around my waist from behind. Marcus pulled me back flush against his chest, resting his chin gently on the top of my head. We stood there together, swaying slightly to the soft holiday music playing through the speakers, watching our daughter light up with absolute joy. Marcus placed a soft kiss on my temple and held me tighter. "You gave us the best Christmas gift," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion and profound gratitude. I turned my head slightly, looking up at the handsome, brilliant man who had chosen to stand by my side through the absolute worst storm of our lives. "What did I give us?" I asked softly. Marcus looked deeply into my eyes, a warm, brilliant smile spreading across his face. "You took out the trash." I smiled, leaning my entire weight into his secure, loving embrace. I looked back at Aaliyah, the teenagers laughing around her, and the beautiful home we had reclaimed from the darkness. The past was completely erased, and the future was entirely ours. The screen faded to black on a scene of absolute untainted happiness. The most powerful takeaway from this story is that your background does not define your ultimate value. Toxic individuals may try to label you based on where you started using their false prestige to mask their own deep insecurities. However, true power lies in silent preparation, unwavering integrity, and self-reliance. Tasha teaches us that you never have to scream to prove your worth when you have the hard facts on your side. Revenge is temporary, but building an undeniable, successful life is permanent. When you focus on elevating yourself rather than pleasing your abusers, the truth will always expose everyone for exactly who they are. If you love this story of ultimate karma, hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments how you would have handled this toxic family.